Okay, I am going to mute all of you except the co-hosts. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June Electric Railroaders Association meeting. This is going to be the last meeting before we take off for summer. We're a little different than the other clubs. A lot of us are doing traveling. I do have co-hosts. One of them is one of the speakers tonight. I want to give them a rest so they've not become de facto the hosts. So we will not have a July or August meeting. Don't look for one. We will resume on September 16th, Friday, September 16th. I don't know yet who the speaker is, but as usual, you will get an email and it is always posted on the website. As usual, the way things work here is we have two speakers tonight. They're going to be a tag team. Paul Grether is in Kew Gardens in Queens, New York, and Kristen Fredriksen is outside Pittsburgh. I will introduce them shortly, but if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Sometimes the questions are such that other members will answer. Send them to everyone. Don't just send them to me so everyone can see them. And generally, I'll look for a logical break in Paul and Kristen's presentation. And I will ask the question. Otherwise, we always have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the program. And now we have reached our 100 plus, so that's very good. So at this time, let me introduce our speakers. Our June Zoom program is called Kristen and Paul's Excellent Adventures, Trains, Trolleys, Tunnels, and Tires. They will be presented by Kristen Fredriksen of the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum and ERA board director. He's actually one of our newest board directors, is Paul Grether. And actually, I owe all my Zoom knowledge, only the good stuff, to Paul. And Paul, in turn, says he owes all of his Zoom expertise, and he does Zoom hosting for 2 or 3 groups, including ours. It might even be more. And he owes everything he knows to Kristen. So we have a lot of Zoom expertise here tonight if we run into any problems. Anyway. They will be showcasing travels in the United States and the United Kingdom, focusing on all things new, old, preserved, abandoned, obscure, otherwise interesting. Kristen works in Pittsburgh as assistant manager of visitor experience at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. And I will give a plug for the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. I think it's one of the best run, if not the best run, trolley museum. They have an excellent online program. And Ms. Fredriksen, if you have a chance, why don't you put in the chat the link to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, both to programs and joining and
Sure.
and all that good stuff. Paul has 17 years of experience in the transit and passenger railroad industry. He's currently in an executive position with the major transit agencies. Current responsibilities involve the rail activation of a large commuter rail extension and terminal station project for a major North American commuter railroad. With that, again, I will remind anybody who came on late, is the next meeting is September 16th, 2022. We will not have a July or an August meeting. One final thing, I think all of you have been good about it, but if you have not turned off your video screen, please do so. I will be going through as Kristen and Paul start, and I will turn off your video if it is still on. With that, Paula and Kristen, it's all yours.
So hopefully folks can see the screen. Let me just get rid of, you're probably seeing a gray bar. Let me get rid of that. All right. Hopefully you can see the screen, Bob.
Yes, I see
Excellent.
just fine.
Excellent. All right. Well, Bob, thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Appreciate it. And just kind of his background, and I'll kick it off. This is going to be a little bit of a unusual and different presentation. Probably not what, if you can call anything, a typical ERA or a typical kind of rail presentation. So this is really more, Kristen and I, as we kind of talked through this and came up with the concept for this, we really don't want this to be kind of the typical vacation slides, right? You know, we've all been there when you got invited over to your relative's house and we're forced to look at vacation slides. You know, it's like, oh, somebody else's travels. That's, you know, not necessarily as interesting. So we tried, and of course, Kristen helps me with that a lot. We tried to wrap stories around everything and some interest. So this is kind of divided up into a whole bunch of little mini topics. We're not going to go real in depth into anything, but more just show some things that I think are interesting to the group. I think as we go along, it'll get more interesting. Some of the things in the beginning are probably some things a lot of folks here are familiar with, but as we get deeper into the presentation, it should get a little more interesting. We're going to try to target around, as Bob and I talked at the beginning, about 2 hours for this. We do have an intermission slide in the middle. We could decide when we get there whether or not we want to take a 5 or 10 minute break, or this is Zoom, right? So you're at home. We're all adults. You can get up and come back as we're going. None of us will be insulted. The other thing I would say, Bob, is just interrupt if there are questions, or if folks want us to try to discuss something. Don't hesitate to interrupt. And I know I can't see the chat because I've got presenter mode here, but I think Kristen's also going to monitor the chat as we go. So Kristen, anything you wanted to add?
I do still see a gray bar on your screen.
Oh, it came back. Thank you.
It come back. But no. I'm really here to provide some color commentary. You'll notice which topics I'm really passionate about. But Paul and I have been traveling together about 4 years to various transportation themed adventures. So that's what you're going to see tonight.
All right. So for those of you who know about Excellent Adventures, you know about this. So some of you, hopefully most of you, get the reference. So Kristen, you want to talk a little bit about the things we use on our trips?
Sure. So there's this set of atlases called Steam Powered Video atlases. They're made by Steam Powered Video. They group the states into various chunks, Canada too, right? And you can buy them. They're very, very detailed atlases of abandoned track, current track, interurban lines, and they show tunnels, mining railroads, narrow gauge stuff. They're really, really useful, and occasionally they release new editions or reprints of them. So, what am I missing, Paul?
Oh, and they're English, which is what's very surprising.
Yes, and obviously you got to bring a camera with you, or else it never actually happened, right? Got to have some hiking boots, a good flashlight, and Paul's trusty Toyota FJ Cruiser, which will make an appearance several times in the slideshow. And this will come back later too. Hampton Inn is our hotel of choice, simply because they have train themed rooms. And then Paul, you can continue.
Yeah, and a lot of some things in here you'll see are things we investigated or were able to see because of groups like this, talking to folks, learning about things, where interesting things are. And then finally, both of us collect books, kind of almost, at least I won't speak for Kristen, but for me, it's almost to the point of absurdity. And the more transportation books you have, the more interesting and obscure references you can find. So we broke this up by the topics that were in the kind of meeting announcement. So we'll go through that. So we'll start with the Atlanta streetcar. And again, this is new, right? So we're going to go through to some of the more obscure things later in the presentation. But I did want to cover just a few what I think are interesting transportation projects. This one in particular, I was involved in at the early beginning. I know Carl Jackson, who's on, was involved in this project as well. In the Atlanta streetcar was really kind of an interesting project from the perspective that there were just a lot of stakeholders for what was a relatively small urban circulator project. So the city of Atlanta was involved, MARTA was involved, the downtown business community through Central Atlanta Progress was involved. There was federal funding, so the feds were involved. There's some state funding, so the state was involved. I think that was kind of the theme here, was balancing the desires and needs of all of the stakeholders. The project did open in late 2014, and I've got some pictures of that we'll show. It's a modern streetcar, utilizes the Siemens S70 vehicle, and there is a desire to extend the system off to the east to connect it with what's called the Atlanta Beltline, which is a series of now abandoned rail rights of way that are being converted to trails, and there's a desire to do streetcar or light rail with trail and extend the system to the east. Just a map to give an overview. It connects to the existing MARTA heavy rail system at Peachtree Center, which you can, let me turn on the laser pointer here, which you can see right here. The system is currently operated by MARTA, utilizing some sales tax revenue that I believe is provided through the city. Was there at the grand opening, the ribbon cutting. This was under the previous mayoral administration at Kasim Reed, although the funding in the original concept was developed under the previous mayor, or two mayors ago, Shirley Franklin. Got to have confetti cannons at the grand opening. And did actually, thanks to Carl, get a little bit of a tour of the shop on the opening day. And then the view you don't often see, which is underneath the S70. And for those folks who have any familiarity with light rail vehicles, particularly low floor light rail vehicles, you quickly realize that the business end of these vehicles is really the roof. You see the floor is really, there's very little equipment under here other than the traction motors. All the main equipment on modern light rail and streetcar vehicles now is all moved to the roof, which has really, I think, changed a lot of how maintenance facilities have to be designed. The system was featured back in late or mid 2017 during the APTA Expo that was in Atlanta, and we'll see more of that later on in a way that you probably won't expect. So moving on to the Charlotte streetcar, this is one that Kristen and I explored less than a year ago. Very interesting system because it was really opened intentionally, very cost effectively, as a replica heritage system using existing Gameco vehicles that the CATS, the Transit Authority, had on hand, and was then later converted to a modern streetcar, and that conversion was included in the design. So platforms were raised, stations were altered, the right-of-way was changed to accommodate modern vehicles when the phase 2 extension was built, which then upgraded the phase 1 system. There is a desire to extend it to basically what would become an over 10-mile system, but currently funding is not identified. It does have a short off-wire segment that is in the downtown area, and we'll show that. So Kristen, these are pictures you took. Do you want to talk about your experience riding the Gameco vehicles?
Yeah, sure. I visited in 2018, the fall of no, it might have been 2019. I can't even remember now. But yeah, I mean, when you're riding, you feel like you're in an old timey trolley. Obviously the controls are a little bit different, but there's some similarities too. So yeah, I went in the winter time and it was clear that they were expanding. I'm not actually sure what happened to these vehicles after if they still have them or if they're gone. Maybe someone can let us know. But here's where it connects with, what is it?
Oh, the blue line, the light rail.
Blue line, yep. And yeah. Sorry, Paul.
No, that's all right. So we then we rode the new phase 2 system this winter, and just kind of got an impression of the extension out to where there's now the temporary end of line until they identify funding to extend the system. You kind of see this interesting arrangement here with a center of road turnback at the end of line. It appears that this maybe is considered to be a temporary end of line. Also interesting to note, and you see this a lot in the newer systems, kind of what new is old again, flange bearing special work to keep the noise down and keep the wear and tear on the vehicle wheels and the special work that's embedded in the street down. So what's old is new again. The vehicles are the Siemens SD 700 car model with the streetcar conversion, so there's not a coupler. These do have off-wire capability, which is used on battery drive. And one of the things that Charlotte did, which they similarly to the Tempe streetcar, is they leveraged their existing light rail system. There's a non-revenue track connection, so they didn't have to build a maintenance facility. These vehicles have the cab signaling so they can operate on the light rail and to and from the existing maintenance facility in a deadhead mode. When we rode the system, and I believe this is still true today, there's a major shortage of operators. I think that's a problem kind of across the industry. I know where I work, that's kind of an issue as well. So as a result, they are not able to operate the full service. They are also not collecting a fare. So they've determined that until they can operate the full schedule, the service will remain free. Here's the vehicle entering into the turnback, kind of all the typical interface with traffic signals, protected movements. I will say a little bit of a video later, probably as a light rail operator and builder, I think CATS follows a lot of light rail operating procedures. They stop at all the stops. There's no stop requests. And the traffic signals, there does not appear to be traffic signal priority on the line. So at least my impression of it was a very nice system. The vehicles are nice, the stations are nice. But I think, Kristen, I think our experience was it was very, very slow. I mean, we caught a lot of red lights and caught every station with very low ridership when we were there.
Low ridership, but I also thought it connected some interesting neighborhoods. So I think, when we're speaking of positives, I think it had really, it seemed to go places that people wanted to go.
Definitely potential. You can see the no fares being collected. The one thing I thought was very interesting was the shelter at the station adjacent to the blue line had all kinds of transportation history, and the Piedmont Northern was a large North and South Carolina interurban system. In the museum where Kristen worked, the Southeastern Railway Museum, where I volunteered a long time ago, used to have this Piedmont Northern box cab locomotive in the collection. This photograph that was used on the bus shelter here was right after the Piedmont Northern restored the locomotive after its retirement to be sent to the museum. Of course, most people at that shelter probably don't realize that or have any interest in that. But that was kind of a neat thing to see that and to realize that there was a connection back to both of our connections back to the Railroad Museum in Atlanta. So here's the vehicle off wire, headed for downtown after its stop. The transition, I don't know, Kristen, it seemed to happen pretty quickly, kind of as the vehicle was moving, right?
Yeah, just sank down, pantograph.
Then here's a video to show what it's well.
This stop is CPCC. Please exit right. Please stand clear. Doors are closing. Train is about to move.
So you see how long that takes, and you're doing that at every stop, regardless of whether anyone's getting on and off. It really slowed the service down. To me, that struck me as more typical for light rail rather than streetcar. But that's certainly something I think that the industry needs to work on.
Jeff says slow doors. Try that in New York.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Or I would add, try that on a French system. I'm sure anyone who's been on either Paris or Montreal Metro, I think the world standard for rapid transit, not necessarily light rail, is to keep it to 20 seconds if possible. But light rail, it might be a little harder to do that. But yeah, I should have timed that video. It seemed like a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, and when there's no stop request buttons, there's a lot of not just slowing down, but also wear and tear on the equipment.
There's a comment that the streets appear deserted. We did visit on New Year's Day, so it was pretty deserted.
We were the only ones that weren't hungover, I think.
Yeah.
All right, next topic. So here's where we probably get to some of the more obscure topics. So I spent a lot of time in Cincinnati, Ohio, working for Metro, for the transit authority there on the Cincinnati streetcar, which really kind of awakened me to the Midwest and a lot of the really interesting, not just rail, but also transit, interurban, and streetcar history that's there throughout the state. I mean, the state of Ohio, I think, per square mile, probably had more rail infrastructure than any other state. And a large amount of very old infrastructure that was built around the turn of the century and later. So felt like should include something that from Ohio that is interesting that Kristen and I explored here. So Sydney, Ohio is a town kind of in northeastern Ohio, small town, but like many small towns in Ohio, was a major railroad town. Both in terms of railroads and interurbans. And the Big Four, later the New York Central, was the big show in town there. And the railroad originally followed the river, the Miami River, through town. And it was prone to flooding, it was curvy, it was kind of a poor alignment, that was built in the 19th century. And in 1913, there was a massive flood. There were a lot of floods in Ohio in the Miami River Valley. In fact, it was pretty devastating to a lot of towns. Dayton, Cincinnati were really negatively impacted. That's a whole story in and of itself. So the Big Four decided we're gonna pull the railroad out of the floodplain and try to get rid of these curves. So like big railroads did, they just dumped money into doing that and did a major civil works project of building embankments and then a large bridge to basically bring the Big Four through downtown Sydney. So it was built, it opened in 1924, but the construction of it could not have gone more poorly. All kinds of safety problems and many construction deaths on repeated incidents. And you'll see in some of the photographs, the way the bridge was built was using a series of temporary wood trestles where rail equipment could be pushed onto the trestles, to bring construction materials and concrete to the site. And these trestles on multiple occasions collapsed. There were trains that fell off, work trains that fell off of the trestles, workers that fell off of the trestles, equipment that shifted on trains, causing deaths. And then the final construction death, which was reported, was that as they were pouring concrete into one of the major piers, a construction worker slipped and fell into the pier as the concrete was being poured and drowned in the concrete, and is there still today, presumably inside the pier, which is kind of an incredible story. Just goes to tell you about how construction projects were handled back then, before you had any kind of like worker safety requirements and law protection laws. And then in a very bizarre kind of unsolved mystery to this day, close to the end of construction, there was a massive explosion in downtown Sydney that blew out the windows on a lot of businesses and homes. And somebody, it's unknown who, attempted to blow up the bridge by strapping a huge amount of dynamite to one of the arches. It was unsuccessful, didn't really do any damage to the bridge, and you'll see why, because of its massive construction. But a just very, very strange story of this bridge. So we had to go see it. So we did.
And a lot of our travels were pandemic fueled because, you know, you couldn't, none of the tourist railroads were running. So we're out exploring, you know, ruins and abandoned things and trying to make our own itinerary.
Yes. So you can see Sydney here on the Big Four main line. This is the Cleveland to Indianapolis, St. Louis main line. Here's Cincinnati down below. For you Easterners, East is over here. This just kind of gives you context of the Big Four and where Sydney is and all of this. You know, the map shows these lines as straight, which I think gives the impression of fast, but they were anything but around the turn of the century. So the design details of the bridge, big concrete reinforced bridge. This was probably typical for the time. And you kind of see these all over the Big Four and the New York Central. A lot of these large concrete bridges were built around this time, kind of around the system, not just on this line, but in other places. A lot of the main line into Cincinnati from the east, from St. Louis, also had a lot of these bridges built around the same time in the teens and 20s. So here's one of the big construction photos. You can see just the massive structure here. And then this photo kind of gives it a good impression of these temporary trestles that were built that caused so many of the safety problems during construction. Then here's the bridge today. There's a lot of architectural features on the bridge, very pretty bridge, but it's suffering from significant spalling. Presumably, you know, I kind of looked up out of curiosity some of the FRA bridge inspection reports on it. I guess it's not structural, but it is starting to have an aesthetic impact as like tiny pieces just come raining off the bridge every time a train goes over. It's kind of disconcerting. Here you can see the structure going through downtown Sydney. The river's in the background.
And that's an old road bridge next to it, right?
Yes, yep, which has been condemned. You can see the spalling, and if you look on the ground here, here's pieces of the bridge that are falling off every time a train goes over. I don't know if any of us, Kristen, I don't remember if you saved a part of the bridge or not as a souvenir.
I did not.
So here's kind of the disconcerting historic marker, and this line: an unidentified worker is believed to be buried in the column behind this marker. That was the incident as the concrete was being poured. Kind of unbelievable. Here you can see more effects of the bridge spalling. Here's another photo that really shows that.
In the comments, there's some comparisons to the Lackawanna. These cutoff structures are apparently common on the Lackawanna.
Yes, yeah, yep. And in fact, that comment is very timely. So many of our topics here, we thought we'd share some books from our library. So if you're interested in continuing to read about things like this, and there's William Middleton, I think, is one of the great railroad authors and transit authors as well. And his book, Landmarks on the Iron Road, talks about concrete arch viaducts, and I think the Lackawanna specifically quite at length. So that's a perfectly timed comment. Then additionally, Brian Solomon, I think, has a great book on railroad bridges that is worth a read if you're interested in this topic. So our next topic, moving on.
Oh, who currently owns the bridge was a question in the chat.
Oh, great question. It's moved from New York Central into Penn Central, Conrail, and is currently CSX. Great question. And we were there when a bridge went, or excuse me, when a CSX freight went over, and you know they now have these long distributed power freight trains, pretty high speed territory. They're between 40 and 60 mile an hour on the on the old Big Four route. It's still a major CSX route. And when one of those things, you know, these giant long freight trains goes overhead, and all these little pieces of the bridge are coming down, it's a very strange experience. So the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association. This is a group that I've joined when I moved to Cincinnati, and I think is kind of very similar to the ERA, but for Cincinnati. And in fact, there was an ERA chapter, I think it was called the Southern Ohio chapter of the ERA, that existed back in the 30s and 40s. Because when you look at, and 50s maybe even, when you look at some of the early Cincinnati fan trips on streetcars, you see Southern Ohio chapter ERA signs on the front of the charter trips. It was kind of interesting. It was formed, the CTHA was formed in the early 80s, and kind of similarly to ERA, there's monthly meetings, but there is also a fleet of historic buses.
What was that, Bob?
Yeah, question. What is the way? Is that ctha.org?
Yes, ctha.org. Thank you, Bob.
I'm putting that in the chat.
In addition to the meetings, they have a really excellent newsletter publication.
Yes, they're very, very, very together group. We have no problems. Unlike some other organizations, we like to promote all of our other groups who have interests in similar areas. So it is a very good group. I agree.
The historic fleet that CTHA owns is now located at the Metro Bond Hill facility. Metro was an organization that, for a lot of reasons over the years, did not maintain a historic fleet. It was pretty hostile to it. Current management at Metro is much more sympathetic. And a few years ago, the agency was able to sign an agreement with CTHA to store their equipment in the one of the operating divisions. And in fact, they've now even been doing some in-kind maintenance work on some of the vehicles, which is great. Kristen, do you want to talk about the opening day parade?
Sure. So every year when it's not COVID, there's a opening day parade with all sorts of participants, including the CTHA in their GM Old Look. And they invite the members to ride the bus. Unfortunately, Paul could not ride the bus because you were on a trip somewhere, but I rode the bus. It was very exciting. You know, stage in the Over the Rhine neighborhood here and make your way downtown. And there's, you know, people lining the streets for miles. It's a really big deal, as I'm sure it is in a lot of different cities. So the bus is signed up for Crossley Field. I'm not sure on the history of that. Paul, you can jump in there.
Yeah, actually, so opening day is kind of an annual holiday in Cincinnati. It's the first day of baseball. The Cincinnati Reds are one of the teams that the Major League Baseball allows their first game always to be a home game. And Crossley Field is their 2 stadiums ago. Used to be located actually where the Metro Queensgate division is now, was the old baseball field. Like Babe Ruth, a lot of the greats would play there on away games. And so that's why the coach has signed up for Crossley Field.
You want to describe for people who've never set foot in Cincinnati what the Over the Rhine neighborhood is? Because I think it's very special.
Sure. So thank you, Bob. Yeah, it's a 19th century German neighborhood of origin. And it's the largest collection of, and you kind of see it in the background of the photo here, of Italianate, preserved intact Italianate architecture in the United States. It actually, many movies are filmed there where Over the Rhine will substitute for New York City for various, particularly Brooklyn. And there's a lot of similarities. The neighborhood declined pretty significantly in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and which culminated in urban disturbances in the early 2000s. And so there's been a focused effort by the business community in the city to reinvest and just preserve and restore hundreds of buildings over the last probably 15, 20 years, I think quite successfully. And that's where the opening day parade stops and starts.
And what does the Rhine refer to in Over the Rhine?
Oh, thank you. And that will become very important in our upcoming segment here. That is the Miami and Erie Canal, which the German immigrants dubbed the Rhine River. So when they went to and from work downtown, they talked about going over the Rhine. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the Miami and Erie Canal here shortly. So just some other buses in the CTHA collection. This is a Golden Gate Transit bus, which is really the only bus in the collection that isn't really connected with Cincinnati, but is in the collection. You see in the previous picture here, connects with streetcars. We used that in a photo shoot with the Cincinnati streetcar later. That was quite amusing. I think it means Muni, but that's okay. This Ohio Bus Line was a wholly owned subsidiary of Cincinnati Transit that ran intercity service to some of the farther out cities like Fairfield and Hamilton, Ohio. All right, so next topic is the Southeastern Railway Museum. Kristen, do you want to tell folks about SRM?
Sure. So it is in a town called Duluth, which is 35 minutes outside of Atlanta, Northeast. And the museum is currently at a former railcar maintenance facility. It's about 35 acres and has an awesome collection of almost 100 cars. I used to work there and I miss everybody there dearly. It was established in 1959 and the transit collection started coming around in 1998. There's a MARTA historic fleet for which Paul has, contributed, had a hand in. And there's a people mover collection, which is very exciting to me. And there's some streetcars, which we occasionally, we put them under tarps right now. And there's even trackless trolleys there. So this piece of equipment is very near and dear to my heart because it's a pod, first of all. It's a personal rapid transit vehicle that was built for Georgia Tech. And in the 60s, there was all this funding for for new transit projects around the country. And this was kind of a result of that. It could carry 4 people. It moved on a sort of conveyor belt system. It was never, put into service, but it was tested, right, Paul?
Yes.
And this vehicle, I was researching it when I was working at the museum to do a spotlight on it. And so I'm looking up all of this information about this vehicle, and it keeps leading me to this guy, Paul Grether's website. And I'm like, who is that? Why does he have all of these pictures of the Transette? And so I sent him a message. I said, can you tell me more about this little blue vehicle? And he says, well, I'm going to be in Atlanta next weekend. Do you want to meet at the museum and talk about it? I said, sure. And that is how Paul and I met. There's a new building, the RTE building that, I see a gray box.
Oh,
Paul, there's a gray box on the screen.
oh, someone is requesting control of my screen. Nope, sorry.
No, we're not doing that. There's a collection of steam locomotives, and this building currently houses a majority of the buses, including a Gwinnett Transit bus in the front here. This is the trackless trolley, really popular. Paul, you can talk more about this if you want.
Yeah, there's some other pictures coming up, but this is a 1947 St. Louis Car Company new look trackless trolley. The body design was unique to Atlanta. I mean, St. Louis Car would often kind of customize their orders for various properties, but Atlanta, they went all out. It was never to be repeated. It's again, has a lot of similarities to PCC cars. The interior is almost identical. A lot of the control layout and equipment was very similar. Just a beautiful, beautiful coach. And we've got some more pictures of it.
This is a Cobb community transit bus, an RTS.
Yeah, it's a suburban, so it's got the high back coach seats. These are the first express buses to operate in Atlanta.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay. This is the very first compressed natural gas bus that was purchased by MARTA, purchased for the conversion, beginning of the conversion to fleet to CNG. These were put into service at the same time as the 1996 Olympics. So very early CNG. MARTA New Look, these are some of the early air-conditioned buses. The rear of the CNG bus. You can see off in the distance there's a 1941 white. That's a Georgia Power streetcar feeder bus used in the Virginia Highlands section of Atlanta.
Paul,
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Bob, I think you muted yourself.
yes, I did. So I have a comment and a question. First of all, the comment is, I think for its time, the design of this trackless trolley was very daring and ultra modern. I mean, it doesn't even look out of place today. The question from Dave Frainer was, he said, please explain that this is the second site for the museum and the circumstances. Can you talk to that, Kristen?
Sure, it's actually the third location for the
Third
museum. The museum was originally founded in Lakewood, Georgia, was called Cinderama, and was there until probably the late 60s, probably 1970. That was in the city limits. Then some property was donated by Southern Railway in Duluth, Georgia. 13-acre site, was not particularly well suited to a museum. There were high tension power lines and a large drainage pond that occupied over half the land, which is probably why the railroad gave it away. Then in the late 90s, the museum was gifted the current facility as a tax write-off by the owner of a former railcar maintenance facility. And the moving of the museum to the new site is probably one of the reasons I came close to failing out of Georgia Tech by spending so much time helping to move the museum. But I learned a lot.
There are two other questions that came up. I think it was a recent picture from Andrew Ladossi. What is the bus in the car barn in Tuscan like red? And Peter's and the other one from Gary Chatterton is, would they have to recertify the CNG tanks for preservation?
The answer for the red bus is it's a 1941 white. It's a Georgia Power streetcar feeder bus. And then no, the tanks have been drained. The bus is no longer operable. So this is 1732 when it was at the APTA Expo. For those of you that were at the 2017 APTA Expo, which I think coincided, or it was pretty close to when ERA had their trip to Atlanta. The coach was on the floor of the convention, which I think stole the show in a lot of cases. And then the MARTA historic fleet was used as a shuttle service. For those of you who know Rich Kresak, I'm not sure if he's on or not, who at the time was with MARTA, this was really his idea, was to use the historic fleet to shuttle the convention goers between the convention center and other buildings and the MARTA stations. This is 1988 flexible metro. I actually took this bus to school and then was lucky enough to be involved in its preservation.
How many trackless trolleys were purchased in Atlanta? Was a question in the chat.
So Atlanta had, I think at one time, close to 400 trackless trolleys. I don't recall the exact number offhand. It had the largest system in North America in terms of miles of wire, but the Chicago system had a larger fleet. Here's the GM Old Look. And all these buses were in service in 2017. That was a really fun conference for that reason. The contrast between a new CNG bus and an old look. And then the Transat.
There we are 4 years after we met.
Yeah. Kristen, you want to talk about Hershey?
Sure. So another one of the, we're in the old section now, right? No, we're in the preserved section of our presentation. So the Friends of the Hershey Trolley is an organization. Their mission, is to preserve. There are two historic Hershey trolleys that they have, number 3 and number 7. The system is in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and started in 1903 by Milton Hershey, like the Hershey chocolate guy. And, he built his first factory off a railroad so he could, get goods in. But there were so many dairy farms in the area that he basically funded a streetcar system to bring factory workers and milk into the chocolate factory. So it was a pretty small system. It connected a couple of the smaller towns. And unfortunately, everything was abandoned by 1946. But there was a really fancy hotel that connected to the system, and the Hotel Hershey. And there were, some really, the downtown was pretty cute. There were some schools, a lot of school children rode the trolley. And now they have this historic car barn, a space in there where they are preserving the Hershey trolleys today. Paul and I visited on one of their public days, which was a Saturday in September. So you can check out their organization's website for that. This is a Cincinnati Car Company car number 7 that we checked out while we were there. And the other trolley was really interesting. They were, sorry. So this one, they were taking some of the later boards off of it, because I think this was at, was it SEPTA? I can't remember, but I know Joe Solomon, I saw his name earlier, he would know, he's on. But when they were taking some of the boards of this off, they found like a whiskey bottle hidden between the wall. And so they were like, oh, we got to save this. And they moved it off to the side and took some photos of it. So yeah, I think you can see some of the original lettering there, car number 3. But there is an Arcadia book that the Friends organization put out that I really recommend. And also Chocolate Town Trolleys, which I believe is probably out of publication, but you can find it.
And Kristen, you have this one in your collection, right?
I do.
So as there's another organization I know Charles Bogart is on called the Hoosier Traction Meet, or the North American Transit Historical Association, that meets once a year. Used to meet in Indianapolis. Now last year and this year we'll probably meet in Dayton. And last year, as part of the first time that the group met in Dayton, the Dayton Regional Transit Authority was incredibly hospitable and organized a very large historic trolley bus excursion, like an all-day kind of fan trip event. I mean, fan trip is really almost too small of a word for it. It was like an event for all of the participants in the meet last year. It was incredible. So this is the view from our hotel room. One thing I'll note, this piece of art here in downtown Dayton reflects the flight path of the Wright brothers' very first flight, which is kind of neat, just to give some perspective. And a lot of folks, Dayton used to be the home to National Cash Register. There was a big GM factory there. They've had over the years, like many Ohio and Midwestern towns, so bad luck with facilities closing. But the town is really coming back, and that was kind of evidenced by in the middle of COVID, with appropriate social distancing, we still saw a big concert outside in downtown. Kristen, you want to talk about this picture?
Sure. So I used to drive back and forth to visit Paul in Cincinnati when I lived in Atlanta. And one day I'm driving up through Tennessee and I just happened to pass this future Dayton trolley bus on the expressway. And that's because they're built in Alpharetta. Is that right?
Yep.
Which is a suburb of Atlanta.
So just some impressions of the fan trip. All of, at the time, the operable historic trolleybus fleet was in service for our fan trip. And even since then, the fleet has been expanded by one additional vehicle, one additional heritage vehicle. So, the 2022 meet of the North American Transit Historical Association, or Hoosier Traction Meet, should be very interesting for the Sunday trolleybus charter. There's Kristen, if you can see her inside a flyer, the historic flyer. There it is. A lot of neat backdrops. There's still a lot of historic architecture in Dayton that form neat backdrops for the photographs. The last ride destination sign is from when they actually retired the flyers back, I believe, in the 80s. This is a BBC. There's 2 of these on the property that came to Dayton from Edmonton, Canada. 110 is operable. This, I believe, has a chopper-controlled propulsion system, and they were looking at buying more of them. They did a test conversion of 109 and 110 to wheelchair lift. I think it was moderately successful, and they chose to purchase new trolleys instead. This building in the background is fascinating. This is, you see the sign for Packard. This is a Packard dealership, and it's also the Packard Museum, but they do consignment sales of Packards in an old Packard dealership. So you can walk in, you can purchase a Packard, not new, but restored, and they have Packard parts. They have a parts department. So it essentially still functions as a Packard dealership in downtown Dayton. If you're ever there, a fascinating place to go. Just some impressions of the fan trip. You can see the lineup here. So the Flyer, the BBC, the recently retired ETI Skoda, and then the prototype diesel electric dual mode, which is a one of a kind, and then one of the production battery electric new dual modes, which have replaced the trolley fleet.
Right.
So
Paul,
Dayton is, yes.
Paul, when you have a chance, Charles reminded me, I think it's a great idea, and you're on the executive committee. You could put a pitch in for the Midwest Traction Meet and the trolley bus trip.
Great, we'll do. Thank you. Yeah, if you Google Hoosier Traction Meet, you'll find the website and can download the registration and find all the information. Kristen wore her former Dayton RTA shirt, which you can see is the same color as the trolley bus. All kinds of special work. It'll be interesting to see how much of this special work remains now with the dual mode vehicles, because some of it may not be needed anymore. Inside the division, here's what the back, the business end of one of the new dual modes looks like. Those are all batteries in the back, lithium titanate batteries. So now a lot of the routes that used to be diesel are being converted to trolley because they can run in electric mode until they get to the wires, automatically raise and lower the poles. Really kind of an innovative approach to trackless trolley. Very different than the approach the MBTA took to like remove their system. Dayton is actually investing in theirs, which is amazing for such a small town. There's the lineup.
The photo stops were numerous.
Yeah, that's right. And it was hot. And the older coaches were not air conditioned. So in the beginning, it was hard to get seats in the historic fleet. And then in the end, it was hard to get seats in the newer vehicles.
I also want to say this was my first fan trip ever, and it was a good one.
So this is a former, I believe, Milwaukee pole. Since Dayton kept trolley buses, they collected line material from cities all over the country. So there's line poles and wires from all these different cities: Chicago, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, lots of different trolley bus systems. They sold their surplus equipment to Dayton. So a lot of the some of the maintenance guys in Dayton can tell you exactly what's where. Kristen, do you want to tell folks about Skyline? I mean, we are coming up on that later.
Yeah, we'll wait till later, but this was our lunch break. There was like, I can't remember the name of this neighborhood, but there's lots of little restaurants along here, and you can see the trolley buses all parked in the background.
So we had an incident. We lost a pole, which was awesome. It couldn't have been more exciting. There was a whole photo lineup that watched them fix the pole on the flyer. It crashed into this light fixture and smashed the head off the pole. But fortunately, the maintenance team was right there. There's a lot of skill on the part of the folks that work for the Dayton RTA. Those men and women know their trolley buses. More photo stops. This is the downtown hub. What's interesting about this is all the special work that's needed to support the bus bays. You can see the wires up in the air. Just time will tell if that remains with the new dual mode vehicles. All right, here's the parade at the beginning. This is a video that Kristen took, a really good video. And one of the things to note is you'll see the trolley buses in Dayton always use their turn signal. And that's really because the switches in the overhead wire are actuated by turn signals. So it's interesting to see when they use it. Kristen, is the video working?
Yeah.
You can hear the bagpipes of the propulsion system on 110. This is the one-of-a-kind diesel electric. And this is a battery electric. So just a quick, oh, go ahead.
There was a question from Andrew Ludasi, although you might have addressed that. Are the overhead switches activated by angle or power on or power off, or is that what the turn signals do?
Actually, the turn signals. Yep. So you heard the little click in the video. I don't know if that came through, but that was when the operator actuated the turn signal, which throws the overhead switch.
Right.
One story real quick about the diesel electric while we're going through some of the remaining photographs is when I worked in Cincinnati on the Cincinnati streetcar, after we got into operation, we had a really nasty ice storm that iced over our overhead lines, and we were really struggling to get service resumed. And the general manager of the Dayton RTA at the time was a gentleman named Mark Donaghy, who is one of the, I think, top professionals in the transit industry, a real leader and a real advocate for transit, not just in Dayton, but I think just in general. And so I called Mark and said, Mark, I've got a problem. Our overhead lines are iced over. We don't have any way of getting rid of the ice. We've tried towing the streetcar with the pantograph and knocking the ice off. I said, can we borrow your diesel electric trolley bus and put a sleet cutter shoe in one of the poles and slice the ice off our wire? And he said, give me 15 minutes. He hung up the phone. 15 minutes later, his director of maintenance called me and said, we're going to be there in an hour and a half. We're just fueling up the dual mode diesel right now. We're going to bring a maintenance truck. Just tell us where to be, and we're going to come help you guys right away. Just really didn't even hesitate. Really a true professional in the industry. I don't have enough. I can't say enough good things about the Dayton RTA as an organization. They realize that the Hoosier Traction Meet brings, fills up a downtown hotel, and so they roll out the red carpet for us.
Paul, another question on the history. You're asking, what's the significance of trackless trolleys still being in Dayton? Why don't they just run diesel buses? That's almost, I call a Quora troll question, but I think you've been in the region, so you know how to answer that. The two key.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Over the years, they've had several kind of pro-environmental, earlier, air quality general managers and groups in Dayton. They've just, I think, been lucky to have the right leadership at the right time. you know, in the civic world and within the agency itself. But we could kind of touch on that in a minute. Kristen, you want to talk about this picture?
Oh, like Paul just mentioned, they really rolled out the red carpet. We go into their barn, or what do you call it, garage, and they've got this table set up with like swag bags for everybody. You can see there's hats there were like winter caps, you know, coasters, all sorts of stuff. Their marketing department must have been so excited to share some of the swag with us.
There's the team that made the fan trip extravaganza possible. And if you want to learn more about why Dayton still has trolley buses, I suggest picking up a copy of Volume 2 of the Trolley Coach in North America by Sebri and Ward. There's a pretty good discussion in there about why the system was saved in the 70s when you know, the equipment was worn out and the decision had to be made. So it was a good segue. So moving on, the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railway. This is a tunnel up in extreme North Georgia. I had no idea about this. I had spent a lot of time in my kind of college years traveling with a couple of buddies from the Southeastern Railway Museum around the state, looking at old infrastructure, abandoned rail equipment. And we had actually created a document and a little database of everything. This one somehow escaped our attention until Kristen told me about it. So this was a place that Kristen took me to that we really did need the four-wheel drive to get in here. The TAG was a really interesting railroad. It was a bridge carrier, which is, I think, kind of unusual for the Southeast because the steam railroads in the Southeast were pretty powerful organizations. And so they managed to position themselves and not get purchased by some of the bigger lines. And they really connected Chattanooga with Alabama. Basically, they connected at Gadsden to the L&N and another southern line. Did not have a significant amount of online traffic, which later became part of their downfall, but were able to compel a lot of through trains between the southern, particularly the Cincinnati Southern CNOTP, and some other lines to connect in Alabama to the L&N and another southern line. Kind of peaked during World War II, initially coal, and then later a lot of steel products coming the other direction from Birmingham and the South. Very early discontinuance of regular steam passenger service, and actually switched to Brill motor cars, which ran through this tunnel we're about to show you. Southern, I think, finally got fed up enough with having to hand over trains to them and finally gave them a deal they couldn't refuse in 1971 and took over and absorbed them, which I think is very late for that kind of transaction. And then they started abandoning the line in segments until the 1980s. Most recent abandonment was about a little over 10 years ago. There's still a small part of it that's in use by the Genesee and Wyoming. So here's kind of a map, shows you Atlanta is here, Birmingham is here, Chattanooga is here, and you see they form this bridge connecting to all these rail lines here and all these rail lines that converge in Chattanooga. So a very strategic line on the part of the initial investors of TAG. This comes out of the Prince Central of Georgia book, which the reason I included this timetable is it has this graphic of the Pigeon Mountain route. So we found this tunnel. So here it is. Kristen, you want to describe what it took to get here?
Yeah, so there's a, I wouldn't really call it a road. It's kind of part like gravel path and part former railroad right-of-way that's only open part of the year. So actually the first time I visited this without Paul, we couldn't drive up there. So we walked like a really good distance to get to this tunnel. But fortunately, Paul and I visited in nice weather. So his Toyota was up to the task.
So the interesting part of this tunnel is how long it is. I mean, it's really going through a mountain. I mean, you don't think of Georgia necessarily as a mountainous state, but the northern part really is. It's wide open. The lack of graffiti is very interesting, which tells you this is not a well-known place. And just the construction, you can see the entrance is bricked in, I guess, to prevent collapse. But this must have been a bored or hammered or blasted tunnel alignment. There was water in the tunnel. We considered driving in, but of course you do the test by throwing the rock in the water to see how deep it is, and it sounded really, really deep. So we opted not to drive into the tunnel. But there must be a curve. We had all kinds of lights shining in there, and could not see the end. It must have been incredible to ride in this tiny little Brill motor car, gasoline-powered motor car, through this tunnel. Probably a fairly claustrophobic experience, I would imagine. But what is essentially a gasoline-powered streetcar. And then this is what most of the tag looks like today. Still technically owned by Norfolk Southern, but out of service.
I love when your car shows up in the photos because it reminds me of the really old timey photos of like the company photographer who was sent to photograph a streetcar line or something like that. Further reading is the Richard Prince book. Has about Central Georgia. Actually, probably only half the book is really about Central Georgia. In the back, Richard Prince had chapters on several major Southern kind of mid-sized railroads, including the tag, as well as a really fascinating chapter on Atlanta streetcars, Georgia Power streetcars. So another abandoned project that is near and dear to my heart is the Cincinnati subway, which I think of any transit project probably has more myths and falsehoods that are stated as fact by alleged experts, and is the kind of subject of urban myth and great political controversy and total collapse and failure of a project, really for some pretty bizarre reasons. I will only kind of scratch the surface on it here, but suffice it to say that in the early teens, Cincinnati was bursting at the seams, was the 5th largest city in the United States, kind of similar to the Lower East Side or Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. Cincinnati's West End neighborhood and over the Rhine was extremely dense, high rates of immigration and from all over. And the focus quickly became on how to decentralize the city. Similar to New York, there was a rapid transit commission established kind of at the same time, the activities around the I&D were mobilizing here in New York. Cincinnati started construction on a rapid transit system. There's a successful bond referendum, but because of World War I and inflation, the construction costs are escalating, but primarily the project fails due to the transition of the city from machine politics, kind of like Tamiami Hall in New York. The same kind of machine controlled Cincinnati, and there was all kinds of political favoritism and graft and politics around jobs and contracts, which the subway was deeply intertwined in. So significant infrastructure was built. You can see 11 to 17 miles were basically substantially complete from a civil point of view. No rail was laid, but that was really the next step. And then as the city reform movement came to Cincinnati, what's called the Charter Movement, a third political party called Charterite was established, and a weak mayor, city manager form of government, which was really invented in Cincinnati, was put into place to dismantle the old machine. And that came with it the death of the subway, which was seen as heavily connected to machine politics. The project is completely officially abandoned in 1928.
Unfortunately, I'm going to throw something in. That city manager was Murray Seasongood, and he's actually a distant relative of mine. And I think with this significant exception, which is very unfortunate, he was actually a very good city manager, but he is the one who put the axe to this project. Yeah. Yep.
We won't blame you, Bob. So the another kind of key feature of the subway, at the time, there was still significant interurban service to Cincinnati. Cincinnati was a junction, but the problem was the street railway used Pennsylvania trolley gauge, did not use railroad gauge or standard gauge. And so several of the interurbans were wide gauge as a result, but several were also, most notably the Cincinnati and Lake Erie, were railroad gauge and therefore could not get into downtown because the Cincinnati Street Railway charged exorbitant rates for trackage rights. So you had to ride a bus from the outer limits of the city. For instance, the CNLE bus would take you downtown. You had to connect. So the subway was going to be built as standard gauge. The interurbans were going to connect, and there was infrastructure built to support the interurbans. The famous Red Devil cars built by Cincinnati Car Company for the CNLE actually were built to subway specifications. And if you go, I'll put a plug in for the Branford Trolley Museum, the Shoreline Trolley Museum. If you go look at their Red Devil, the rear door was built to facilitate high platform loading in the Cincinnati subway, but of course never ran there, never operated there. So this would have been the system if complete, basically a loop line with a branch out to the Oakley neighborhood. The other problem with the project is these upper neighborhoods were outside the city limits of the city. There were some what I'll call donut hole cities, most particularly Norwood, which were their own municipalities entirely contained within the city. And they were very hesitant to help assist fund the construction. Even though a lot of construction took place in Norwood, they didn't pay for a lot of it. I think there were some assumptions that they were going to get annexed into the city, but even today, that's never happened. This is what was built. So you can see a significant portion was built. And then what does it look like today? This is a trip I took down into the subway. This is the Race Street station. This is the interurban platform. So there was most of the station, there was island and side platform stations. And this Race Street station had a pocket track in the middle of the platform that would have been used for the interurban services that would have been able to dwell and change ends there. So this is where the Red Devils would have come. And then there was a Y built underground so that the interurbans, like the Red Devils, for instance, were single-ended vehicles, could turn underground and then proceed back out. This is the Y track under Central Parkway. The subway, the downtown portion of the subway was built in the abandoned Miami and Erie Canal. That was the canal that connected the Ohio River from Cincinnati up the kind of eastern part of Ohio into Lake Erie. And when the canal was abandoned, the subway was put in its place. You can just see the significant amount of infrastructure that was built. Today, the subway is generally used for certain utilities. There's a water main in one of the tubes, and then telecommunications in another. The city maintains the structure because it's holding up the streets up above. So the structure is still maintained. In the 1960s, the Ludlow station was converted into a fallout shelter for the city administration should the unthinkable happen. And it was never used. And today the remains of where the city, I guess city council and high level administrators would have been in the case of nuclear fallout is still there. Kind of humorous. There's the water main running through the, I believe this is the Brighton station. Some other remains of the fallout shelter. The platform of I think this is the Ludlow station. And then today, the stairs that lead up in several of the stations that go to almost like New York City style entry doors into the sidewalks. These would have been led to head houses had this project ever been completed. It's built to railroad, I think, plate C standards. So plenty of room. One of the things you'll hear a lot when you talk to people in Cincinnati is that they claim there were construction errors and the subway was built too small. The cars wouldn't fit. The cars wouldn't go around the curve. Having walked the system, I mean, it's built to very generous clearances and very generous curve radii. So just not true. This is the Race Street station with the doors open when we were down there. There's the interurban pocket track from up on platform level. You have to realize it's pitch dark here. Normally, there's no lights. There's also no rodents because there's no food. But you do have to bring your own lighting to take these types of pictures.
Oh, how were you able to, is this publicly available, or did you have to make a request to some official source to be able to walk this?
This was part of the APTA streetcar subcommittee meeting in Cincinnati. And we did get permission from the city administration. The previous mayor shut down the tours. There used to be biannual tours that you could take that were guided that the Cincinnati Museum Center would do. The previous mayor shut that down. The rumor is that the new mayor, Mayor Puraval, is considering reinstituting the tours.
The reason I ask is we are looking for new venues for future ERA conventions, and the Cincinnati streetcar by itself might not be enough to do it. But if we can tie it with a tour of this facility plus adding another couple of Ohio or even Detroit to the itinerary, I think Cincinnati would be an interesting new venue for a ERA domestic convention. So that's why I'm asking.
Let's chat for sure.
Yep. Okay.
Further reading, turned out to be a good friend of mine when I lived at Cincinnati, a gentleman named Jake Mecklenburg, very young when he wrote this book. He was in his early 20s, sought to dispel a lot of the myths around the subway and actually write an accurate history of the system. Very well researched book. He cites everything, and highly recommended, even if you're not from Cincinnati or haven't lived there. Just a fascinating story about really what turned out to be a very dysfunctional, almost like a white elephant type project, and what it could have been for the city and what it ended up being. All right, another tunnel, the Cleveland and Marietta Railway. So this was a kind of almost fluke that we discovered this following the annual summer rail event in Marion, Ohio. Kristen and I, with a mutual friend, were driving around, and we're following the Cleveland and Marietta right away, again with our steam-powered video, or our British Atlas, and found a kind of tiny reference to a tunnel. And this was nowhere near any roads. And we kind of hiked in, kind of on a guess, did some grid searching, and we're actually able to find this tunnel. The Marietta and Pittsburgh Railway became part of the Pennsylvania Railroad in about 1900. Never really a major line, except during World War II. Then basically when Penn Central went up into Conrail, this was an early abandonment. Not even sure if Conrail ever operated on the line. Like I said, this tunnel, very difficult to find. Here's how it revealed itself to us as we were hiking through the woods, basically trying to follow the ridgeline where we thought the railroad was. Pretty significant construction. So in the 30s, right in the middle of the Depression, the Pennsylvania must have invested a tremendous amount of money in rebuilding the Marietta and Cleveland. You can see for single track line, that is substantial concrete construction. Again, the standard railroad of the world, they had money back then. It's what the railroad looks like now. This is kind of just what our hike looked like, you know, as you're trying to find where we thought this railroad was. Our first clue, you know, you find a cross tie. It's, I think, FRA condemnable. And then there it is. And Kristen, the next question, should we go in? You hesitated, right?
I'm always a chicken, especially when you can't see the other end. It was very quiet, like all around there, very quiet. Like Paul said, no roads nearby. And there was also thunder happening. So I was reluctant to go inside because I didn't want to get trapped in there in a thunderstorm. But Paul is an explorer, so he decided we should go in.
And Kristen's a good sport. The tunnel niches, kind of interesting. No use for those.
graffiti.
Go ahead, Kristen. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said no graffiti, like no one knows this is there.
Yeah, kind of amazing.
Also hard to take pictures.
Yeah, when you're unprepared for being in such a dark place, you know, you do the best you can. There's a curved tunnel, which is kind of interesting. So significant engineering. Here's the other portal. There's the right of way on the other side. Then in terms of further reading, a reference that's familiar probably to a lot of ERA members from an author who's presented here previously. Chiarella's volume 1 of his tome, kind of documenting the history that the Pennsylvania has some good history on the Marietta and Cleveland. So you can read there on the history of that line. So a little more Atlanta streetcar, this time not the modern, but just some interesting references. You know, my hometown is Atlanta. That's where I grew up. Not a lot of interest in that system by fans or anyone else, just because it's as a city, most folks aren't from Atlanta. They're from somewhere else because of the extreme growth. And it was a system that abandoned early, so not a lot of people remember it. Atlanta considered PCCs, but instead went gangbusters on trackless trolley, as they called it, trolley bus, and actually extended lines under wire from the termini of the original streetcar lines. Since Georgia Power owned the system, their interest was in electricity, not in rails. And the final line, you know, after a lot of conversions throughout the 30s and 40s, after World War II, the final line closed in 49. So if you ever find yourself at the, again, referencing Branford, a lot of good reasons to go to the Branford Museum. They have the fully restored Atlanta streetcar. That's a whole story unto itself. You know, Jeff Hackner that's on, and probably others who volunteer there, do a great job at Branford restoring and maintaining and operating that museum. This is the former Ashby Car House, which supported the Atlanta Northern, which was one of the interurban lines operated by Georgia Power. So a good example of using the steam-powered video atlas of things you can find when you look up the car barn locations. It's still there, being used as an art facility. You can see the front doors that used to be the doors. If you go online, there's photographs of this. Tom Morrow, I don't know if he's on, who is with the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association, maintains a fantastic website called the new Dave's Rail Pictures, that have pictures of trolley systems around the country. And there's a lot of good Georgia Power historical photos, including of this building. So this is the 19 River, where it crossed under the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, former Western Atlantic Main Line, way up in the northern part of the city on private right-of-way. And again, using the atlas, following rights of way, what do we discover? But that this tunnel still exists under an active major CSX right-of-way. The Keystone is 1896, so the River Line was a very early electric streetcar line. You can see what used to hang in the tunnel. Kind of incredible that that's still there, you know, many years after abandonment, many decades after abandonment. And with, you know, massive CSX freight trains rolling overhead. Another neat location is if you go out to Smyrna, Georgia, along the right-of-way of the former Atlanta Northern interurban, the city of Smyrna has converted the former right-of-way into a linear trolley park with all kinds of references, little signs describing in great detail the history of the Atlanta Northern. You can see the bricks kind of form an ode to the tracks that used to be there. Then finally, if you look at, particularly in town, at some of the substations, you find substations that used to provide, in addition to AC, also, you know, the 600 volts and have the old Georgia Power logo that was included on the streetcars. Their slogan was "A citizen wherever we serve." And this is kind of an interesting photograph. I took this in the early 2010s, actually late 2000s, at the beginning of the Atlanta streetcar project when I was working on the NEPA, the environmental document. And this is the Candler building, and is an old eyelet, basically a guy wire attachment for trolley wire from when streetcars and later trackless trolleys operated in Atlanta. This actually, this is actually the Hurt building. And we were able, during the course of the development of the streetcar, I was able to find, don't ask me how, but copies of the old Georgia Power franchises, which included all of the building attachment agreements in them that Georgia Power had, which then were conveyed to the Atlanta Transit Company, the Atlanta Transit System, and ultimately to MARTA. MARTA had no use for them. You know, they got buried deep in some boxes. We pulled them back out. And if you ride the Atlanta streetcar today, you'll see we were able to save money on poles in a handful of locations by doing building attachments. Georgia Railway and Power Company, that went away in the early 20s, but it became Georgia Power. But you see throughout downtown Atlanta, you'll find GR and PICO lids that go into electric vaults. This is a Georgia Railway and Electric Company lid, which that predates the unification of the system, which goes way back. I'll give you a reference for reading about the unification in Atlanta. What's often called the Second Battle of Atlanta, which was a huge fight in the merger of the streetcar systems there, often violent actually, with streetcar systems ripping out each other's tracks at night, and police and even soldiers having to be used to compel them to follow their franchise agreements and behave nicely. An old line pole. So just a flavor again, and if you're interested in the history of Atlanta transit, there's not a lot of references out there, but a good one is volume 1 of Gene Carson's Trolley Titans, which describes the second battle in great detail. So Washington, D.C., kind of similar, you know, has a modern system, a small modern system now, but also has all kinds of interesting remnants from the old system. Unusual in DC, similar to the Third Avenue in certain locations in New York, used conduit power. And because of the prohibition by Congress on overhead wires in the district, underground currents. This is at the National Capital Trolley Museum. Also, I think National Capital Trolley Museum traces its lineage back to an ERA chapter, I believe. So this shows how the plow operation occurred. And then this is outside in the kind of the grounds of the National Capital Trolley Museum. The reason I show this will become apparent in subsequent slides, but kind of take a mental picture of this. We can go back to it. This is a track switch, obviously designed to be embedded. Interesting because it, you know, supports plow operation. So you have to actually, you know, cross your rail wheel flangeway over your plow slot. But anyway, these were all throughout the district.
Note the checkerboard pattern on that in the center there.
Yes. So this is in Georgetown. There's a short segment of preserved track, which was rebuilt by the district Department of Transportation at the neighborhood request. This has kind of become a neighborhood icon, this remnant of track. And so then, Kristen, do you want to describe what else we did in Georgetown?
So we were looking at old maps of the system, and we noted that we were nearby where a plow pit used to be, where they would change from the conduit to the overhead, and a guy would kind of go down underneath the trolley and disconnect, connect with the pole up and all that kind of stuff. And so we looked at a map and we said, it should be here. And so we found this, there's the checkerboard pattern. We couldn't figure out how to get inside. So fortunately we had an e-scooter and we used the kickstand to open up this utility lid. And when we looked inside, we found remnants of, I don't know if this is actually the plow pit, but definitely streetcar remnants inside. So there's some crack in there. Sorry,
It
go ahead.
looks like it might have been the clean out, maybe in a turnout or not, but you can see this round piece again that goes back to that turnout we were looking at earlier. So there's your rail buried underneath the street right outside Georgetown University. While we were doing that, police car drove by while we were opening up the street, and I think Kristen, you kind of smiled and waved at them, and that made it okay.
They've seen much weirder things, I'm sure.
Yeah. And then a quick picture. If you're ever in DC, check out Metro Bar, which is a new bar that is being created around a former 5000 series CAF DC Metro car. So what better place to get a beer after winding down from some intensive urban exploration? We also found some abandoned trolley bridges. We followed the Glen Echo line. Again, in the interest of time, not included here, but a lot of good books written about the DC streetcar system, but also some very obscure references to not a lot of literature around alternatives to electric overhead current collection. Only two that I'm aware of is this volume 7 of the Traction Collectors Library, which is a reprint of a very early 20th century monograph of electric conduit railways. And then a British monograph on kind of global alternative overhead systems. Very obscure topic. Picked this up at the gift shop of the London Transport Museum, but it includes a significant chapter on both the DC and New York systems, as well as other global systems, you know, in the first part, late 19th century, early 20th century that did that. So I know there's probably a lot of folks on here that know a whole lot more about the Long Island Railroad than I do, particularly the history. But you know, after I moved to New York, Kristen and I were looking for things to do in the pandemic. And so again, we got out our atlases and started following the dotted lines, the abandoned lines. And first we'll talk about the Cedarhurst Cutoff, which may be the only mainline railroad in the United States that's been abandoned 3 times. So here's what's left of the right-of-way. This was the only remnant we could find. Kristen, I don't know if you have any additional commentary about this. It was cold. But this was, I think, built, even when it was built, it was pretty redundant and never really significantly operated. It was electrified. And then when I first moved to New York, I briefly lived in Richmond Hill in Queens and just became obsessed with the Richmond Hill station, now disused. I don't know if I would call it abandoned, but there's no more trains, passenger trains that serve this. Still used by New York and Atlantic freight, but just a kind of really neat piece of Long Island Railroad infrastructure, clearly built during the Pennsylvania Railroad era of grade separations. If you're ever in Richmond Hill, I will highly recommend Alfie's Pizza that is right next door to the Richmond Hill station.
Seconded.
Just some views from the platform. That's the J and the Z train that go by. Last station was last used in 1988. The lower Montauk line, besides this station, all the other stations did not have high platforms and had very little infrastructure. And due to very low ridership, since this line really only served Hunters Point and Long Island City, it was decided to no longer serve them with passenger trains due to the investment required to go to high platform. Then a little birdie told me about this when the East Side Access Project utilized the New York City track geometry vehicle to do a track geometry inspection of the new territory. To access East Side Access, it had to traverse the lower Montauk. So kind of an interesting photograph of New York City transit equipment in New York and Atlantic Territory on the Long Island. It really shows the difference in IRT loading gauge versus railroad gauge. And then one final Long Island Railroad photograph, the former Rockaway Beach branch, now of course New York City Transit, from the beach on a cold day. There's a whole bunch written about the history of the Long Island Railroad. I would recommend, there's a bunch I would recommend, but probably one of the most interesting books I've been able to collect is a 7-volume set written by Seafried, kind of a comprehensive history of the LIRR. Very, very interesting.
Now on to the obscure.
So Cincinnati's airport is CDG, and it has probably one of the most interesting people mover systems, I think, of any airport, although Kristen is probably more of a people mover expert and aficionado than I am. But Cincinnati uses a hovercraft people mover system called Hover Air, and it's a cable pulled system. So there's no wheels. I'm not even sure it qualifies as a I guess it's rapid transit, and was built by Delta Airlines in when Cincinnati was expanded as a hub back in the mid-90s, which they then quickly dehubbed after they merged with Northwest Airlines. So in all likelihood, they would never have built this people mover today. You can kind of see it here, but there's no track. There's just a concrete guideway that it hovers on, and it's silent. Operates between the terminal and 2 concourses. Kind of typical interior. This is actually a video I think that Kristen shot. You see there's very little sound as a result of the hovering, other than there's like a whooshing sound constantly, I guess, of keeping the bags inflated.
Can't hear the sound on that one, but that's okay.
Maybe because it's so quiet. And then Kristen, this is one that's in your collection, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I eat up the automated people mover stuff.
You want to tell us about Jungle Gyms?
So Jungle Gyms is a grocery store chain. Well, there's only 2 locations around Cincinnati, and you know it's more of an amusement, or it's more entertainment than it is grocery store. Although you can buy tons and tons of groceries there. There's a massive international section, and there's all sorts of things inside, like whole bus stops and airplane seats and a theater. You know, it's attraction in addition to a grocery store, and you can, you know, buy something from every country there pretty much. And at each location they have monorails, one of which is operable. Well, we've never actually seen it operate, but it does operate. I think you can charter it for parties and stuff. This is one of the locations. This is the one that does not have an operational monorail, but the monorails came from a local amusement park, right, Paul?
Yeah, Kings Island. They have award-winning restrooms. I would say Google it. It's probably not worth going into the detail here, but were nominated the best restrooms in the country one year by CNN, I think.
So this is the operational monorail at the, what is it, Fairfield location? It's part of like an events rental facility, basically. So they store the cars here, hoping one day to get a chance to ride on it. They question, there isn't one in Springfield. Paul?
Yeah, Springfield is where the operating monorail is.
Yeah, okay. And the other one is Eastgate, I think. This is the Eastgate location.
This is the Eastgate location, yep.
This is so weird. Complete with jungle noises. So there's a really great book called Monorails of the World if you want to learn all about amusement park monorails and monorails as transit. It's a good book. I guess I can talk about this too. One of my favorite obscure transit systems is the Morgantown Personal Rapid Transit at West Virginia University. It connects 3 campuses there and opened in 1975 with some little Boeing vehicles. And it's about 3.8 miles. And it only operates really when the students are there. So if you are unlucky, like Paul and I were on our first trip, you won't get to ride and you have to come back a couple days later after the students get back from fall break because it doesn't run during fall break. But it's super reliable. You know, the original construction estimate was 15 million, final cost was 62 million. So it's a really unique system. You can fit about, I think there's 8 seats in each vehicle. They're little pods. Paul, you can talk more about it.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's a true, it can operate in a mode, a demand response mode, where it's truly a personal rapid transit system where you, as you enter the fare gate, select your destination and it assigns a vehicle to you that takes you straight to your destination. The vehicles can bypass stations or enter them, and there's a control system that manages all the movements. It can also operate kind of in a hybrid demand response mode, or as a rapid transit system where it makes regular stops, and those modes are selected based on the you know, the crowding at the time. So
one of the comments is that there's lots of side-to-side hunting and it's very jerky to ride. I think I would agree with that.
Here you kind of get a good perspective on you can see the tracks, or the guideway, I should say, that goes past the station, and then the 2 kind of inbound and outbound. This is a kind of middle of the line station. So there's an inbound station and an outbound station. So you kind of self-segregate based on your direction. And then a pod is assigned to you after you go through the fare gate and select your destination.
And I think the on-demand was out of service for like a really long time and was recently basically turned back on only recently. Yeah,
the university spent a significant amount of money replacing the control systems. And actually it's a CVTC based system now. And it does go into downtown Morgantown. There is this one station that gets you to the edge of downtown, which so it's not just a circulator within the university.
Do you remember what its hours of operation are, Paul? I don't think it ran very late.
I don't recall.
And do you know if there are any, I mean, it looks like it's pretty well maintained, but those are the original cars. Do you know if there are any plans to replace the car? You said they invested in the control center. Any plans to renew the cars? Because like the Dallas airport people movers from the same, like the 70s, and they did a total replacement at the Dallas airport.
Yes, so my understanding is there's a whole new fleet procurement underway now.
So they're really committed to it. That's great.
I think so.
Ooh, it's like a roller coaster.
So pretty soon, Kristen, Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, that you got to pick which one, right?
If only. So this is another one of my kind of current obsessions, is Skybus, which was a demonstration project that started in the 60s. It was Westinghouse technology, and they built a test track in South Park and ran demonstrations during the Allegheny County Fair. It was super controversial. It never actually happened. You know, it was super political, and sorry, I'm going all out of order on this slide. I just get very excited about Skybus. So basically, like it would have followed a lot of the trolley lines that currently existed. And, you know, Port Authority and the city council favored this plan, and a couple others supported investment in light and commuter rail. But, you know, everybody kind of forgot that the trolleys existed. Actually, they didn't forget that the trolleys existed. They kind of wanted to get rid of this old trolley technology and replace it with something new. But you know, one of Paul and I's favorite things to say about Skybus is that it's one situation where the Trolleys actually won in history. The Trolleys didn't defeat very much, but they did defeat Skybus. So this is the 3 vehicles that they had operating at South Park, often for the fair. When the fair ended, the demonstration rides ended. And you can kind of see where it was today. There's still one remaining building, which is like a park facilities building now. It's, you know, I think it's right next to the dog park in South Park. And this is basically the first generation of the Westinghouse lineage people movers. At the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we actually have quite a number of volunteers who worked on this project, who worked on the interlockings, and it's just fascinating to like hear their stories about the politics back in the day. I'm so removed from that. I just see this and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a vehicle in the air, and it's like very exciting to me. There is one vehicle that still remains today, and it's in West Mifflin outside of the Bombardier, I guess, former Bombardier facility. And it hasn't ever been open when I've been there, but inside it has some TV screens and climate control and all sorts of things. So it's been restored there, and I think it's sat there since about 2012. And yeah, there was a whole group of people who preserved it. So this is the only remaining vehicle that I know of the 3, but the whole system was torn down in about 1980 at South Park.
But aren't most of the airport people movers, not all of them, but a really high number of them? Oh, you're getting to that.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, some of the biggest systems around the world are Westinghouse lineage people movers. So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. You can get this, it's a multi-volume set on the Transit Expressway report that talks all about the construction and specifications and everything. Which leads to the Atlanta plane train. It wasn't always called the plane train. That was a contest that they held in 2009, 2010, and it was renamed that then. But this is Atlanta's airport automated people mover. And in 1971, the technology that was developed for Skybus opened in the first airport, which was in Tampa. And since then, it's in a couple dozen airports around the world, and also several actual like transit systems outside of airports, including Miami and Singapore. And the one in Atlanta is the busiest in the world. The latest numbers I saw said 250,000 passengers per day, which they want to increase by 20% by adding an extension shortly here. But the one in Atlanta opened in 1980. It had a really scary voice when it first opened that you guys will probably think sounds like Hal from Space Odyssey. And right now they have their second generation of vehicles, which are the CX100s, which replace the C100 vehicles. And they're currently thinking about getting some more. This is kind of a layout from a book called, what's it called? A Dream Takes Flight. And the spine down the center where Paul is highlighting is where the plane train runs. The landside terminal is all the way at the left. And this is kind of a diagram from when Atlanta was reconfiguring to a different terminal concourse configuration. So you can see the old terminal at the top there and the old runways. And now they've reconfigured to this like T-gates A, B, C, D, E situation here. So to connect all,
it goes all the way out here now, right? This is where the new international.
Yeah, exactly. And on the far left is where they're extending the tunnel like another 700, 800 plus feet on the far left, actually, in the past the T gates.
Oh, over here. I'm sorry.
Yes. So let me get my notes out about this actually. So this is kind of a more modern Google screenshot of what the airport looks like today. And the people mover goes right down the center. It comes every 100 and 812 seconds. And the goal is to get that down to 90 seconds by adding a new turnaround. So this is what it looked like when they were constructing it. They had some problems with the water table. It was pretty difficult to construct, but I was fortunate enough in 2018 to take a tour offered by the city me and a friend from the museum went and checked out their maintenance facilities, and it's this whole facility under the airport. So these are some of the 59 vehicles. The color is called Volvo Orange. I guess that was very popular in the 70s when they were first painting these vehicles. Most people don't even know what color they are outside of the system because you can't really see them when you get on them. They have some artwork in their hallways of other transit airport people movers around the world. This one's in Frankfurt. And the control system is really impressive. You know, they've got cameras everywhere. They're lining trains. I think each train is, whoa, now I can't remember. I was gonna say it was 11, they have 11 trains out at peak. So 12 is their absolute max. This is the test track. So they have an entire test track where they can test various scenarios, kind of parallel to the rest of the system underneath the airport. And here's a video. The in-service trains are to the right. There's all the people going to their flights. And you turn into the maintenance facility. So the project manager and contract manager is the gentleman who showed us around. They have 3 jet engines basically to evacuate smoke from the tunnels. It can get stagnant smoke out in less than a minute.
How many cars are, 2 questions I have, how many cars are in a standard train set? And then Will Cowles had a question of, they're carrying 250,000 passengers a day on that one line. What is MARTA Rapid Transit Rail carrying per day? It sounds like it's more than what they carry.
I think there are 4 cars per train, I believe, because each one is 800 horsepower, and I know there's 800 horsepower motors. Yep.
And Bob, I think this system is equal to, or in some cases more than what MARTA carries.
I mean, those are New York subway line volumes on a very short system. That those volumes are spectacular. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, when I visited, it was 7,500 to 10,000 people per hour per direction, and that was only passengers. That didn't count employees or anything. Here's the little car wash that you can go through. They have a whole training facility down there to work with the doors. There's different kinds of doors, I think, because the system was built at different times. This is the track, right, Paul?
Yeah, it's I believe it's AC, multi-phase AC, so that can collect hotel power in addition to propulsion power from different contacts along the guideway.
Their on-time performance is 99.95 to 99.99, and below 99.95 they have a penalty. And anything like worse than 60-minute service problem is considered a catastrophe. Is this the voice?
I think so.
This vehicle is leaving the station. Please hold on. The next stop is Concourse B. The color-coded maps and signs in this vehicle match the station colors. Please move to the center of the vehicle and away from the doors.
So they decided to get rid of that voice in the mid-90s when Atlanta was hosting the Olympics, because they thought folks would not be able to understand that kind of, creepy voice. I thought this was funny. This is their depiction on their COVID signage for social distancing during the pandemic. That totally looks like a CX-100 vehicle with a pantograph and everything, and like chairs. So I think it must have been some kind of stock graphic that they picked for their COVID signage. And as Dave mentioned in the chat, the Southeastern Railway Museum actually has two of them. One of them is on display. And, you know, one time it was parked outside for a while, so we had to move it. I thought this was kind of a fun picture. So this is the original generation, the C100 vehicles that pretty much immediately followed Skybus. Pittsburgh actually still has the C100 vehicles for their airport people mover system. This is in Pittsburgh. Like we mentioned, they're in airports all over the world, including here in Pittsburgh, where Skybus didn't work, but they still have this Westinghouse lineage technology at the airport for now. And I mentioned this book, A Dream Takes Flight. It really talks about aviation in Atlanta and how the airport came to be. It's really neat if you're also an aviation fan. Oh, and I mentioned this earlier. Paul and I stay at Hampton Inns pretty often. I guess the points and the breakfast. And although one time we went to a Hampton Inn and they gave us a moon pie for breakfast. So, you know, I guess it was a COVID thing, but that's our choice for hotels for traveling because they have railroad themed rooms. You can see the little picture. They're not really themed rooms. It's just on the sign. So here's a couple that we've stayed in. All right, Paul, this is all you.
Okay. So you may be wondering, what the heck does chili have to do with trains? A lot, actually. One of the things I learned in Cincinnati pretty quickly is that chili and chili recipes are like really, really important. And determining what kind of chili you like is important. And that Cincinnati has chili, but it's not chili. It's really kind of more of a sauce that's put on pasta and on really, really small hot dog that they call conies. Anyway, it was brought to Cincinnati in the early 40s. They don't call them restaurants, they call them chili parlors. Those are really kind of like the equivalent of a diner in New York City, or like a Waffle House in the South, where you go not just to get chili, but breakfast or, you know, sandwiches or whatever. Anyway, there's an annual meeting called Summer Rail that used to take place in Cincinnati Union Terminal, but is now held in Marion, Ohio Union Station. And, you know, everyone comes from around the country, rail and some trolley fans, and the obsession with Skyline is strong because, you know, since the meeting used to be in Cincinnati, so they actually have contracted with Skyline to bring a large quantity of Skyline chili to Marion Union Station for the Summer Rail event every year. And so you can sit and after all of the programs during the day and watch the shows and go to the swap meet. Then in the evening, everyone goes back to Union Station, which is now a small museum. You know, all of the big magazine editors are there. A lot of prominent photographers in the rail and transit photography world. And you get some chili and watch trains. The action, Marion is where three significant, used to be four when the Erie was still running, but significant main lines cross. And so there's a train here every few minutes, major freight trains hammering across a whole series of diamonds. So we got some Skyline, watch some trains. One of the neat things about the museum is the former Erie Tower, AC Tower, that controlled all the movements in Marion is now preserved and was moved by the railroad to the other side of the tracks outside the station. And all the equipment, the interlocking machine, everything is still in there, and you can watch trains from the tower too. And it's nonstop. So there's 3 different sets of diamonds.
And it is loud.
Yeah. So if you want to know more about chili, there's a book for that too. So if you're a rail fan or a trolley fan in Cincinnati, you got to eat the chili.
We should probably speed it up a little, Paul.
Yeah. So otherwise interesting. The Western and Atlantic Railroad, many folks are on the call are probably familiar with the Great Locomotive Chase and the story of the Union Raiders that spies that went into the South and hijacked a Western and Atlantic passenger train in Marietta and headed north, attempting to sabotage the Western Atlantic unsuccessfully. The WNA is a state road, still is today, was built by and is owned by the state of Georgia, currently leased to CSX. It's really the reason Atlanta exists, because the southernmost terminus became the city of Atlanta, where it later met the Georgia Railroad coming from Augusta. It's still today a very slow railroad, doesn't have any passenger service. It was leased from the state of Georgia by the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis for a long time. And up near Lake Allatoona, outside of Cartersville, probably about 30, 45 minutes outside of Atlanta, the line was realigned because the Corps of Engineers created Lake Allatoona for hydroelectric power. And as part of that realignment, actually in the beginning of World War II, you can see there was significant construction to eliminate curves and again get the railroad out of the floodplain of the former Etowah, or what was the Etowah River, later Lake Allatoona. The original alignment is hiking trails. This is the Civil War era W&A alignment, which is kind of fun to go see and walk on. CSX operates on the new alignment. But what's really interesting is there's a kind of unknown soldier tomb. This is apparently the story goes that the Western Atlantic was transporting a coffin back, and there was no paperwork with the coffin going to Atlanta. The railroad workers didn't know who it was. No one came to collect the remains. It was a Confederate soldier. There's still, strangely enough, in the South, some feelings about the Confederacy, but this was buried along this former right-of-way. And when the line was relocated, the railroad paid to relocate this grave as well, and it's still there today, right along the CSX line. Further reading, there's a great book about the history of the NC and St. L that covers the history of the Western Atlantic in great detail. A fairly recent book. And then Bob, it's up to you. I don't know if the group wants to take a 5-minute break. We're going to switch continents after this and go through a couple of places in the UK, or if we want to just keep plowing on.
Just keep plowing on, I would
That's my
say.
vote.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to keep plowing. The snack bar is a
plowing.
lie. There is no snack bar.
There you go.
So Kristen and I made back in September of last year a major trip to the UK. It was kind of a lucky trip because of some unluck. We had planned to go to the Netherlands and other parts of continental Europe, and because of COVID protocols, at the last minute, probably a day and a half, 2 days before our flight, we had to cancel everything because quarantine requirements went into effect even for vaccinated travelers. So Kristen stepped up and created an entire itinerary going basically from the south all the way up of the UK, all the way up to Scotland. And we made several stops at points of interest along the way. The first is the Bluebell Railway. Let's just say it's a large collection of steam locomotives and is the world's first standard gauge tourist line with preserved steam. You can see it's to the south of London. We went on a weekday. England is kind of heaven for rail fans and trolley fans as well, as we'll see. I'm sorry?
The train spotters.
Yes, thank you. So we took the Southern service, formerly British Rail, down to East Grinstead, which connects with the Bluebell Railway. Had a display with the whole history of the tourist line, which is really, really interesting. I won't get into the details here, but well worth a read. This was, I mean, just unbelievable, the equipment that they operate in, essentially tourist line service.
And it's a really popular filming spot too. So if anyone here has watched Downton Abbey, you might recognize some of the stations, like this one in particular along the line.
And a real commitment to the period kind of perspective. You can see, I mean, in this case, this is the only time I saw anyone in high-vis clothing. All the employees wore traditional uniforms, which I thought was really neat. This is a video. We were having some problems with the sound earlier, so I'm not sure you'll get the sound. Can you hear the sound, Kristen?
No.
Yeah, there's some issue with iPhone videos and sound over Zoom in PowerPoint. technical issue we'll have to work out later, but I'll just say there's clickety clack.
It just got pixelated for me too. It might be me
Oh,
though.
yeah. You can see an example all along the line. Everyone wore the correct uniform. Oh. In the end of the line, they ran, say, a tender engine. They ran around, get water. And what I thought was awesome is it was also tea time, as the British call it, lunchtime, and they used the steam locomotive to cook their bacon. Museum with all kinds of interesting explanations of how British rail lines, all the civil engineering involved, signage. I mean, just museums that were top notch.
Indicated the grade, right? With like the tilted signs. Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, very strange. Like apparently it was a big deal to know what the grade was. I guess in the steam days that was important with heavy trains. There's a beer festival coming. Unfortunately, we missed that, but we made up for that big time later. Then the station. The story of the Bluebell Railway is fascinating and well worth a read. I won't get into the details here. And then also the story of Southern, the original Southern Railway, which served a lot of the territory south of London. Also very, very interesting. High-speed third rail operations, you know, a lot of commuter, also development, you know, residential development south of London, really kind of shaped London, particularly the southern parts of London and the railway network even today. Kristen, do you want to talk about mail rail?
Sure. So I have a friend who really likes British rail stuff, and I asked him for suggestions on what to do, and he said mail rail, which was something I'd never heard of. And it's a post office railway, really similar to the Chicago Tunnel Company system. And there was a ton of congestion in London, and they conceived this in 1911 to speed up the mail through the city. It's really, really tiny tunnels. It's only 9-foot diameter, 2-foot gauge, driverless. And now it's all closed and part of the London Postal Museum. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, yeah. So you just see the map connected to Paddington Station in a series of postal distribution centers. None of the extensions were ever built. Kristen, you should describe our experience.
Okay, so there's basically two parts to the Postal Museum, like the museum part with exhibits and stuff, and then across the street is the entrance to mail rail. So you go down and you wait in line, and these are the little tiny vehicles that you have to squeeze into. And Paul is very tall if you haven't ever seen him in person. So it was quite a squeeze.
And you used a postal insult to describe me. What was that?
Yes, I said this train is carrying an oddly shaped parcel. There's the vehicles again. One's in and one's out loading. There's Paul's friend in London. Is this a video? One of these is a video. So we sat at the front of the little train. And right now, I think she's basically, you know, operating a narration system with an iPad, but it's really informative. And they have some, you know, kind of theatrical like screens along the way where you stop in one of the stations and watch a little video. And it's really, really cool.
The construction used the shield construction method that, you know, was invented in London, of course, on a much smaller scale, but you can really see it in the tunnels. Some of the original vehicles on display in the museum. Here's the very railroad-like, even for this small automated system, but they had to still manually dispatch trains with interlocking machine.
This was a really cool exhibit that I think like every museum with a railway post office should have. And it is a rocking exhibit. So you go inside and there's little slots to sort your mail. And you know, they're all like electronically activated. So you know, like if you put the mail in the right spot, it gives you like a green signal. If you put it in the wrong spot, it gives you a red signal. And the catch is that the floor moves back and forth to simulate being on one of these moving cars. So I thought that was really neat.
This
Question-
was similar to like an American rail crane. This is the British version where they could kick mailbags on and off of trains while they're moving. And then something I didn't realize is that until not too distant past, the Royal Mail in the UK provided transit services to rural communities. And in addition to transporting the mail, you could actually ride in the mail vehicles, you know, between towns and connect to bigger cities. And that service was passenger service was provided until fairly recently.
Question about the traction power system for mail rail. Do you know anything about that?
Do not, other than I believe it was there was a pair of contactors between the running rails.
So Bruce
similar,
Moffat,
like
oh sorry, Bruce Moffat responded, today battery powered had used the center third rail in the past.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that in Germany and Austria, and I think Switzerland, postal bus system was a major operator, and they didn't use little vans, they used full-size transit buses. I'm not sure, I think by now those have been all privatized. I think private carriers under contract. So it's interesting that they use the little tiny vans. So.
No, I'll highly recommend this book. It's just a really, really interesting story. And it operated late until 2003,
Yep.
which is unusual, I think. So I think if you go to London, right, you have to go to the London Transport Museum. It's just really, really well. It's small in a way, but crammed full of very interesting artifacts, and equally as importantly, the interpretive signage and the story that it tells, going all the way from the beginning of kind of just walking all the way up through the future of transportation and kind of city planning for London's future. It's just a very, very well done, well thought out museum from a curatorial point of view.
They didn't have one when we were there, but they also have tours of disused railway stations and all sorts of behind the scenes tours. Very realistic horse cart or horse tram exhibits.
You go up to the top and then you chronologically wind your way down. These are just incredible to me. These old Metropolitan line steam locomotives, to think about, you know, the steam operation underground, all the attempts at technology to mitigate the effects of the smoke and the hot gases underground, you know, with very limited success. You know, you don't think of steam engines as having transit style destination signs, but these did, you know, kind of similar to some of the elevated railway engines you might encounter in New York or other places. Rails to Metroland and the suburbanization of London. Also a very, very interesting story. You know, not just the rolling stock, but all the associated infrastructure, the impact of escalators on, you know, the tube system and kind of rapid transit around the world. Lots of interesting detail. Construction of tunnels, the shield method, and then these coffin cars, which are just unbelievable.
So what was the thinking? Like, oh, people are going to be underground. They don't need windows.
Yeah. Ugh. Kristen, you want to talk about this?
Oh yeah, they're very into the moquettes, which I guess is, you know, the carpet patterns or fabric patterns on all the different lines. And you can buy pretty much all of it in the gift shop on purses and socks and blankets and anything you can imagine. There was a really cool exhibit about the fonts and styling through the years.
Trolley bus.
Some of it was closed for COVID that would normally be open, but luckily Paul is tall and can peek in the windows.
Another really interesting story is a lot of the buses, in World War I, a lot of the London transport buses went to war and were converted into military use. That's, you know, if you're unfamiliar with those stories, there's a lot of really good information online. If you don't have a copy of The Moving Metropolis, it's an excellent piece. Another place we visited that was really interesting was St. Pancras Station. Beautiful station now, kind of like the story of Grand Central Terminal in New York. Teetered on the brink of demolition for quite some time and was disinvested and not in a state of good repair for a long time. But in the early 2000s, significant investment by the national government, and now is the Eurostar terminal in addition to some other regional services, and is absolutely beautiful. And then the attached Midland Grand Hotel is also beautifully restored. Really, really cool.
There's Paul.
It's like a Where's Waldo. The whole story is well laid out in Alistair Landley's book about the transformation of the station. It gets into both technical detail, political detail, really, and the connections to the high-speed line, HS1, and how the politics of that really drove the transformation of the station as well. Kristen, you want to tell us about Barrow Hill?
Yeah, before we move on, you guys have probably realized that I'm a little newer to this railroading hobby than Paul is. And to me, it was just fascinating to be in a city where there's still so many railway stations, like in everyday use in London. So, you know, you just think about what could have been here. So one of our trips was to the Barrow Hill Roundhouse, which is actually square. And we heard about a beer festival here. It's in a town called Chesterfield, which is actually, well, we'll get to that in a second, but it's located, I don't know, maybe a couple hours north of London. And we took the train up there. And they have this massive beer festival with 100 breweries, like thousands of beers. And we were lucky enough to catch the first one since COVID. So here's a sampling of like the full beers they give you when you get your beer tickets. It was just a really scenic place. They had actually a charter that you could take to the beer festival from one of the local stations. And unfortunately, we did not take the charter. We took a bus, but the charter pulled up while we were there.
Kristen, I'm going to try and play this video. I know this is one we had the sound issue with.
Okay. Yeah, no sound.
Yeah. So the at Barrow Hill, there's a Railway Heritage Center, and Talgo, actually, the Spanish car builder, had donated one of their Talgo carriages to basically assist with technical education for local kind of trade school students. And they had a whole setup in there. I just thought, like, you know, you're among all this old steam equipment and preserve, and there's like a brand new Talgo car there. It was very interesting.
Here's a sampling of the ales. There was, you know, a whole contest of, you know, of ranking system, and yeah. And what they're not refrigerated, right? The British style is not refrigerated and less carbonated or non-carbonated.
Yeah, not pressurized either. It's a manual pump to get the ale out of the cask or the keg.
So the town near where the festival and museum was is called Chesterfield, and it's actually home to George Stephenson, the father of the railways. You probably have heard of him. And it has this great statue of him there right outside the train station, and also a really, really interesting church with a twisted spire, which actually looks really scary, but it's twisted because of the poor construction and the materials, and you'll see in a minute, the twist of the spire follows the route of the sun. So here's the Stevenson statue right outside the train station. He's holding his little locomotive there. It's pretty neat. And we didn't even know this was here. So sometimes Paul and I have accidental rail fanning, which is always fun. So there's the church with the creepy spire. The sun, you know, it really like follows the path of the sun around, and to me it looks like a witch's hat or something, but really interesting.
And if you're into early steam, there's some good and early railway development in the UK. This is a good book. Then additionally, Kristen, you recently acquired a book on early steam locomotive technology, right?
Yes, and we'll actually, at one of our next visits, we'll see some really, really early steam, a replica of really, really early steam, 18 teens.
So the National Tramway Museum, you know, in previous trips, Kristen and I have both been to the National Railway Museum in York. So this time we opted instead for the National Tramway Museum in Christchurch, which is a really, really interesting museum in the way it developed, because it's not on an old streetcar or tram line. It's way outside a city and is on a former, basically mining tramway. But they created a tramway village, as they call it, to provide context for the tram operations. Really, really nice. I think very similar to what PTM is now doing, right, Kristen?
Yeah.
So they want volunteers.
I do volunteer coordinating at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, so I'm always interested in what other museums' brochures look like.
Just beautiful equipment. The boat tram.
Just the mind for preservation over there, with like relocating whole buildings to these like havens of preservation, is just so fascinating.
Just to give a little flavor, Chesterfield, where we were earlier. A Brussels snow broom built by Brill in Philadelphia. And then a familiar face. They have a Third Avenue Railway car, which I believe came here by way of Vienna. Very odd looking Blackpool tram. Then there's a separate building where they keep a lot of the trams that are not in kind of regular circulation. They have a steam tram, large scale models. horse-drawn line truck, very interesting.
It was their steampunk festival when we visited as well. So there were lots of people in steampunk costumes, which was really different sight.
A PCC from The Hague. Really, really neat operation.
And everything is like handbrakes. Well, everything that was operating that day.
So further reading, this Tramway Era pamphlet was one of their first fundraising booklets from the 1950s. And you can find copies of it online, kind of a neat little monograph. And of course, Great British Tramway Networks, if you want to learn about, very similar, I think, to the US, maybe even worse, actually, in terms of the mode that peaked and then was just completely destroyed. Kristen, you want to tell us about Beamish?
Sure, I had heard about this museum before. It's an open air museum, which is very common over there. And this one's in northeastern England. We took transit to get there on one of my favorite little transit systems called Go Northeast. And the park is huge. I mean, it has everything up to about the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, which just recently opened actually after we visited. So they've got trams, they've got buses, and I can't remember, I think they're building trolley bus too. Maybe that was another place. No, I think it was here. But yeah, you
I
can
think you're
ride.
right.
Yeah. Lots
So
of
the-
little places for fish and chips throughout the park.
And it basically the loop of the streetcar and the antique buses take you to all the different eras, right? And the different,
Yes.
it's all kind of chronological.
Yep. There's the 50 section that just recently opened. So shows you how fast they move. This was just last September.
This was like 1920s, maybe?
Yeah, and you
1950s?
could go inside all the shops and learn about the history. They have other like railroads too that operate a little less frequently than the trams and buses. That's their accessible bus.
The car barn. And there's a small mining railway, right?
Mm-hmm. I think all of this runs, or a majority of it anyway.
You want to describe this?
Yeah, this was a replica 18, is it 13? I forgot to do my research before this presentation on this one, but it was a very, very early steam, 18 teens, where the firebox was like on, or the, yeah, it was on the opposite side of like where you control the locomotive. And it was really interesting. Takes you through the countryside and yeah.
Well worth a visit. So Clockwork Orange, this is the as far north as we got in Glasgow in Scotland, is the Glasgow subway. Fascinating history, very small system, never expanded. Was renamed Glasgow Underground in 36, and then they named it back to Glasgow Subway. It has two lines, which are basically a double track, one inner loop and one outer loop in opposite directions. It's tiny. You know, I have to duck to go in and out, and I can't stand up straight inside the vehicles. New rolling stock was brought in 1980, and then now they are taking delivery from Statler of even newer rolling stock to replace the fleet. So here's a map of the center city of Glasgow with the Clockwork Orange, as it's called by the locals.
Unfortunately, go back to the map. Unfortunately, when we were there, only one direction was operating. So,
yeah.
for example, if you wanted to go at the bottom from Shields Road to West Street, you had to ride the whole loop around.
So these are being retired now, and these are from the basically the system was in very poor condition in the 1970s and was starting to show early signs of structural failure of some of the stations and tunnels. So it was shut down and completely overhauled and reopened in 1980, and that's when this rolling stock showed up. So you can see how small it is. Can't even take a full picture in there.
Oops, the curved doors.
Kristen, this is specific to your area of specialty, right?
Yeah, they have they call it Gaelic, the basically Scottish Gaelic language that they're trying to revive. It's not spoken natively by too many people anymore, except some like very remote areas. So there's a whole language revitalization project going on. And although not too many people are fluent or even bilingual in this language, they're trying to make it happen. And one of the ways they're doing that is putting the bilingual signs in the tube.
So the Glasgow Subway album kind of depicts the end of the original era before the system was rebuilt. Interesting, good. It's a photo book essentially with some history. So our last topic is the Caledonian Sleeper. It's one, you know, the UK is just barely large enough for overnight sleeping car services. So to get back, you know, we had traveled incrementally all the way to the north into Scotland. So to go back to London to catch our flights, we decided to take the sleeper car train. And it was, I think, a very positive experience. I would say that the much smaller British loading gauge makes designing sleeper cars a little bit of a challenge. You know, Kristen and I have spent the night in Amtrak Viewliner roomettes many, many times. And this is significantly smaller, but I would say the ergonomics are very good. There's brand new rolling stock from CAF, and you know, it was delivered just as the pandemic was beginning. So it all still seems very, very new. Kristen, what were your impressions?
My feelings on sleeping in this car were the direction of the bed was much more favorable to sleeping. So in the Caledonian sleeper cars, the beds are perpendicular to the track, whereas on Amtrak, they're, well, if you're in a regular roomette and not like a family room, they're parallel to the track. So I find when I try to sleep on the train in the US, like I sleep on my side. So I'm constantly like rolling back and forth when we go around curves. But this way, when you're sleeping perpendicular to the tracks, I think I slept a lot better this way.
Then about 6:30 to 7 a.m., you arrive in London, in Euston. And our train was close to an hour early, and they just leave the train there so folks can continue to sleep. There were several business people on the train, which surprised me, who I guess, you know, sleep in and then conduct our business and I guess go back to Scotland. So with that, Kristen, unless you had anything else, we have reached the end.
That's it.
Quite how many hours is that overnight sleeper? How long is that ride?
Well, when did we board? Around 11 or 11:30 at night?
Yeah.
So there's, you know, there's no dinner. I think they did offer some meals, but you know, you didn't really have enough time to like sleep and eat.
Right. And then if you so choose by day, they do have faster day trains, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You wanted to take a sleeper, and I totally get that. That way you can do your whole day in Scotland and then sleep overnight and have enough time to make your flights. So listen, you bankrupted me. I think I only bought 3 books during the course of the presentation. You should look at the comments. You got very kind comments. You had 116 people at max, which is great for early summer. This was really something you did for a professional convention. It was really, really well researched. A lot of unusual topics. It was an excellent, excellent presentation by both of you. And of course, it's significant. We don't get that many under 40, under 50 presenters. And I think, Kristen, I think you are our first female speaker ever. I don't think we have ever. So it was great. Broke all sorts of new ground, but it was, regardless of your age or gender, it was an outstanding presentation. And you can see all the accolades. Actually, Sandy Campbell said, my favorite ERA Zoom show so far. And I almost like to say, well, actually, the PTM, since you handle that, Kristen, I think the PTM shows are not, but I think the strong point of the ERA presenters is we cover wide ground. And boy, did you two cover wide ground. CERA gets to Chicago minutiae. Cincinnati gets a little, Cincinnati's actually not bad. Boston gets like stultifyingly Boston minutiae, and I'd like to say we cover everything, and PTM really covers a lot of ground too. So it shows. So with that, why don't you, or I guess we're already in gallery mode. I guess I have to put myself in gallery mode. So all of you, you are free to unmute yourselves and turn on your video. And in a few minutes, you can give your questions to the speakers. Again, no July or August show. September 6th is our next show. So anyway.
I updated the website, Bob.
What's that? You updated webs. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you very much for the kind words, and thanks to everyone for sticking with us through the end of the presentation.
I think it's well deserved, and we definitely want you both back as it's regular on the circuit. I know Andrew doesn't make every show, but I know he made this one. No, he's not on now, but he was on earlier. So yes, we definitely, unless I hear anything to the contrary, but he and I do the programming, you both will be definite regular speakers. So keep thinking of what your future topic, once a year, what you'll do. So with that, comments from the group here. There's still about 70 people here. So
I do have a question, Paul. You mentioned a few times special materials or some kind of term like that. Like the first time it was like the regarding tracks, and then you at the back of one of the trolley buses. It was like the term that you had about special something, special build or special materials. And I wondered if it was that like an industry term, like what was that referring to?
Special work, maybe? Or...
Yeah, special work.
Oh, so special work is like where you have instead of regular track, you have a track switch, or like where the wire diverges or crosses itself. That's considered special work.
Okay.
You're right. It is kind of an industry term. I should have defined that.
Jesus Christ.
Good question.
all of you should be able to unmute yourselves and start your video. I just took the restriction off, so feel free to turn on your video and your audio.
You'll notice most of our travels are East Coast themed, so we've still got a lot of traveling to do, especially West Coast. And
especially all your special topics like on Skybus, the Cincinnati subway. I know Charles is chomping at the bit to talk about the inclines. Oh, he's still on. Okay.
You want me to talk about Dayton and come to Dayton and ride the trolley bus? Yes, we're going to ride the trolley bus. The third weekend in August on Sunday.
Mike Licken and I are already booked for that convention. We are coming.
Okay. Well, it ought to be a fun day of riding trolley buses.
While we repeat the website, one of you, either Paul or Charles, what's the website to register for the Midwest Trolley Meet?
Sure, it's who'syourtractionmeet.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Please, that'll be good. It is a very good, it's almost like 2 days from 8 a.m. to 5 or 8:30 to 5 of ERA or CERA type presentations, and all presentations repeat. So if you can't make one time, you can make the other. And then, as Charles said, that trolley, but the trolley bus charter you showed was from 2021, right, Paul?
Correct.
Right,
Yep.
so it'll be something very similar. Once again, actually, Paul, you have now given me an idea. I hope Mike doesn't keel over for a future convention covering Cincinnati and Cleveland area. I think it's very doable, especially if we can get a walking tour of the Cincinnati subway.
There's going to be a surprise for this year's trolley bus tour. It will not be the same as last year.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
How about Detroit? How about Detroit, Bob?
Well, if we do Cincinnati and Cleveland, we could throw Detroit in. And if we do Cincinnati and Cleveland, my other idea is this. We are finding that the ERA members who actually travel are actually much more affluent than the ones who stay home. So we may actually pick somewhat nicer hotels that are evocative of the streetcar era. What do I mean by that? Cincinnati would be the Nederlander Hotel, Hilton, and in Cleveland, because I just stayed there, we would stay at the Hyatt Regency at the Arcade. They have the old 1890 Arcade Shopping Mall, which is the second oldest shopping mall in the US. And obviously both of those facilities were very well known during the trolley times.
There's two other things in Cincinnati. Dixie Terminal still there where the Cincinnati, Newport, and Covington streetcars came in. And
Oh,
we have
right.
still the remains of 5 inclines that you can see.
Oh, right. You mentioned that. Yes.
Come to Cincinnati. We'll treat you right.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
even have some Skyline chili while you're here.
There we go.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. I would love to. Well, Paul is one of our very active board members. We will talk about future conventions, and I think definitely it's definitely in play.
Sounds good.
I think having a meal, like a dinner or something, in one of those abandoned subway tunnels would be really cool. Table, and some wine.
That's where we could eat our Skyline chilies down the tunnel.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask my two co-hosts who are the speakers. A few people are having trouble turning on their video and audio. I thought I turned it on, but maybe I didn't.
I can't get my video on, but I got the audio on.
Oh, here, let's see, start. I got it. I just found it. Never mind.
I heard something about an interesting model railroad in Cincinnati too.
That was, I gotta say, a very interesting show. A lot of things that I've never seen before were included in the show. You guys put a lot of work into that, a lot of effort, and I'm gonna have to expand my rail library with some of the books that you recommended.
There's so many more.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, the other thing in Cincinnati you might want to check on is the historic Roebling wire bridge
Oh, yeah.
across the Ohio River. That is certainly worth another item on your itinerary.
It's like a Schroeder Brooklyn Bridge.
And of
Yeah,
course,
the
the Cincinnati
streetcars.
Union Terminal.
Oh, the good
Which is-
point. Yeah, we would
And-
include a
And
stop.
the
at
Roebling,
museum.
the Roebling Bridge ends at the Dixie Terminal.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
those,
yeah, there's
so
plenty
you've
to
already
do.
got a full agenda.
Right. And Cleveland has the, what you call Northern Ohio Railway Museum. I looked at Columbus with the Worthington Museum, but the problem is it's only open on Sundays. And if we did this, We have to work it out, but that, we could do something in the Midwest.
Yeah, and Bob, in Cincinnati as well, the Behringer Crawford Museum has the Cincinnati, Newport, and Covington car. That's a parlor car, handbrake, single truck car. And then the Union Terminal has the kind of city history exhibit with the Cincinnati curbside car in it.
Yeah, Mike and I visited that museum, and as I say, offline, maybe at a future meeting, we'll talk about a possible itinerary. We had been looking at a Toronto convention, and the Toronto Transit Commission has an openly hostile
Oh, really?
openly hostile, and making it almost impossible to do charters. So we don't want to raise people's expectations. So we're looking for an alternative to Toronto for 2023. We are going to San Diego. We're sold out for 2022.
Bob, what happened to the Olmsted Falls collection of trolleys that was out in suburban Cleveland? Any idea?
Gone.
It was sold off.
It's gone.
Sold off to other museums? or-
Developers
Yeah.
bought the trailer park, and it was all sold off.
All the cars were distributed to other trolley museums across the country.
Who's speaking? Can you identify yourself? Who's speaking, just so we know who you are?
Jeff from Brantford.
Jeff, okay, great, okay.
Yeah, with the exception of, I think one car was kept by the transit authority. They have it on their property, but that collection was saved. All those cars are preserved.
Oh, good.
All across the country.
I wonder
If you
what
go
happened.
to at least with respect to trolley cars, if you go to the Paneric website, you can trace that. You could search for all cars formerly owned by Trolleyville and see where they all wound up.
Great.
I wonder where all the trolley buses or the white buses that
I
he collected
yeah, I
as
can't
well.
answer that question. If it didn't have steel wheels, I don't know about it.
I think they were scrapped during the Brookins era. They didn't last very long.
So if you're interested in that topic, if you go online and Facebook and search for an organization called NIDO, the North American, wait a minute, Kristen, help me out here.
Northeast Association of Trolley Organizations.
Thank you.
Oh my
Yeah, they had a virtual kind of meet this year, and one of the programs, it's recorded on YouTube. There's a link, you can watch it for free. Was the disbursement of the Brookins collection and how that was done and where all the cars went. Very, very interesting.
That would be interesting.
It was
There is
presented
one.
by, it was presented by Steve Heister from Northern Ohio Railway Museum.
I'll put it in the chat. Hold on, let me look it up here.
There is one
they
Ohio
also-
Electric Railroad car out in the parking lot in one of the western suburbs of Cleveland. It's been restored in a shopping center. And it looks like it's ready to go between Cleveland and Toledo.
Also, Brookins ran a restaurant there at the peak of operations, and included a Wurlitzer pipe organ. And
I have found there's a lot of overlap between pipe organ enthusiasts and trolley enthusiasts.
oh yeah,
That was EJ Quimby's. EJ Quimby's thing was pipe organs, I believe.
And he had one in his basement.
had one in his
Why
house.
is that?
He had his, I don't know.
I think
One is electric and
I
one is
think it
air.
has to do with people who are interested in history. Mike Licken and I have a friend in Los Angeles area who was active at Southern California
Orange Empire.
Orange Empire.
Well, Orange Empire is the former name. They've been renamed. But anyway, but he's a big bus and rail enthusiast. But in his professional life, he actually restores carousel organs and church organs. So I think it's it's more common than we think.
The National Railway Historical Society just had a convention out there. And one of the features, in addition to Paris or Orange Empire, or call it what you will, was the Nethercutt Museum, which was which had not only a Royal Hudson, but also a monster Wurlitzer pipe organ,
Oh my
and
goodness.
many, many, many cars. And He was one of those Renaissance people who, through cosmetics, was able to afford to buy all of the toys that you can possibly imagine out there. That
All
was
of
a
the
big
what?
event.
What could he afford to buy, Dave?
Toy.
Well, he made his money in cosmetics, ladies'
Oh,
cosmetics. And so while Mary Kay went out and bought, pink Cadillacs for their top sellers, he decided to invest it in historic preservation. Good for him.
Yes.
If you ever go to that museum, it's the only place I've ever seen it. They have a Alco, American Locomotive Company car. And there was a brief period when Alco was building automobiles, and they actually have one.
It's like Aeolian built mahogany runabout boats during that particular period. So there was a lot of crossover between a lot of the kinds of things that we enjoy and treasure by the manufacturers themselves.
Interesting.
You ever try the Whitestone branch of the Long Island Railroad? It's very, very little.
Huh?
You have the Whitestone branch of the Long Island Railroad. It's hard to
What
find
about
the remnants.
It went to a community called Malba.
Yeah, Malba, that's one of the stations. The name of the developers. Father Cross Island Parkway is the right of way where the Whitestone Station.
Basically under the Whitestone Bridge.
Whitestone Station where with the Cross Island Parkway.
Did it go to Whitestone Landing?
Yeah, Whitestone Landing was the last stop. That's a shopping center now.
Yeah.
Oh, Paul,
Verged off the Port Washington branch at Flushing Meadow. as I recall.
Critch, is that pronounced, how do you pronounce Critch?
Crich.
I think it's
Critch?
Crich.
Critch. Yeah, I was
Oh,
just, it was
nice.
really good to see that in the video form, because we had a couple of pictures of that from in headlights.
You know, Paul, it's too bad. Mike and I have a longtime friend who has gone on our international trips, who's a longtime member of the Kreitz Museum. He would have, last name, Mike, help me out. Last name was Smythe. He would have enjoyed seeing the promotion of his museum.
Yes.
The
Well,
next
it's
time,
recorded, right? Or is-
the next time you go to England, Kristen and Paul, make sure you schedule it during the illuminations at Blackpool, because they dress up all the trolley cars in all kinds of fantastic themes, like a snow, a showboat and Wild West things and things like that. It's a once in a year event that runs from Fleetwood on down to along the boardwalk activities there. It's really quite something to see. And also, they have a trolley bus museum, which is not quite, but almost up to the scale of what Kreitz is for tram cars.
Is that the one we tried to go to, Sandtoft or?
Yes.
Sandtoft, yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we only had like a day's notice that we were going to the UK. So when I reached out to them, unfortunately, they were not available the days that we turned out to be available. But it is on the future list.
Well, Kristen, you had a wonderful itinerary put together in such a short time, and did a beautiful job of leading Paul around all the wonderful attractions in
Right.
England.
But if you can get to Blackpool, try and take your boat across to the Isle of Man, the Manx Electric
man.
Railway. That's
Yeah, that's
really
on the list
fantastic, a
too.
fantastic ride.
Yeah, that's
Alongside some
another
of the
one
other
on your
rail
list.
attractions.
Yeah.
They have a steam-powered train to the airport.
And the horse.
I think we have to put Paul and Kristen on our trip. We create a trip committee instead of being just Mike and myself. I think we need to include both of you.
It's all Kristen.
You know,
Oh, great.
we
You got another
haven't,
job, Kristen.
we haven't done England on ERA international trips for a very long time.
Right. So that could be
Maybe
on
30 years.
A lot happening there.
Right.
The Canal Society of New Jersey had 5 trips to England, and they still didn't cover it all.
Yep.
Wow. Great.
One of the, it didn't make it into this presentation because it was before I met Paul, but one of the coolest things I ever did in England, for anyone who's a fan of steam, was Trevithick Day in Cornwall. And Richard Trevithick is like the father of the high pressure steam engine. And I think every April, the little town of Redruth in Cornwall, which is like extreme southwest of the country, they have like this giant steam parade of steam everything, like, you know, steam rollers, traction engines, and all sorts of stuff. It's really, really cool.
They have a steam-powered merry-go-round, believe it or not, as well. And incidentally, the Trevithick, the original Trevithick engine, has been rebuilt, has been built in replica and actually operates. So it is something to see. My grandmother was born in Cornwall, so I have a great affection for the place. Yeah.
The other operation of overnight sleepers is to Penzance in Cornwall. You had talked about the one up to Scotland. That's the other one. That's a really nice one done by the Great Western Railway. There's a whole list of oddity transport stuff in England, and you can just go crazy with it. One of the odder things you run across is in Sheffield is a continuous moving elevator. It does not have a door on it. You jump in as it's moving by and jump off, and it goes in a complete circle. It's difficult to explain. They have pictures of it on the internet. By the way, Sheffield is also where they have the only tram train in England, where a light rail vehicle goes out on the main line.
Cool. I'm sad we missed that because we weren't that far from Sheffield.
Also, Leeds has a huge curb guided bus system where the buses run 40, 50 miles an hour all by themselves without steering. It's all done mechanically. And there's a half a dozen of them in England. They're really cool to see.
Yeah, Cambridge has a long one, yes.
Yes.
I know.
Mark, good to hear from you, by the way.
It's good to see you.
I think in Wales maybe, or somewhere in Western England, there's an industrial monorail museum as well, which would have been fun.
I haven't heard of that, but they, if you're in Wales, the transporter bridge is something to see, because it's basically a lift span that you can't possibly imagine how it ever worked.
Somebody just said in the comments about the continuous elevator, they're called paternoster lifts, which is correct. Right. And the wording comes from the fact that it was how you would do a rosary if you were praying. Think about how it would droop down and come back up again, and that's how these elevators work. And it's astounding to take it.
So you have to pray before you get on, like maybe I'll make it this time.
It's a good idea. It was the scariest thing I ever did, to jump onto that thing.
You have to be nimble. Yeah, it was.
There's only a couple of them left in the whole world now.
Yes, the other one's in like Prague or something.
No, if I recall right, unless they replaced it, I rode one in Helsinki, Finland, in their Capitol building. They had one of them, and I actually took it. They go pretty slowly, but you have to be alert.
People still have gotten killed on them, though.
What's that?
Somewhere in Germany too, I remember seeing.
I don't think you can get killed. You might fall on your face when you get off it, but that's about it.
People have died. They have died.
Yeah, they are not ADA compliant.
No, no, they're not.
Definitely not.
The cool part is riding around the top because it goes horizontal at the top.
Yeah, supposedly, my dad was raised in Vienna. They said kids were always afraid of what happened when you got to the top, whether they went upside down, and of course they don't.
No.
And one of the most exciting rides I ever had on an amusement park was the Ferris wheel. I guess you could call it the Great Wheel at Coney Island.
The Wonder Wheel.
Down to the top, it went on a track.
Yep.
And so that you thought it was a conventional thing until it started to move and dip downward.
That was the Wonder Wheel.
Yeah, was that what it's called?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It was the scariest ride I've ever been on.
That was pretty
Listen,
scary.
guys, I rode that as a kid, and we got up the top and the thing broke. I was up on top of that thing for about an hour, me and my sister. She still talks about that. And that was the last time I rode a Ferris wheel. You weren't going to get me on one of those and get stuck up the top again. Never.
The thing about the Wonder Wheel is they always say it's 150 feet high. The swinging cars don't go to the full height of the wheel. They're a little bit lower down so that they can start to swing.
As far as I was concerned, I was 6 miles up in the sky.
Right.
On one of the non-swinging cars.
Right.
And the reason I went to Coney Island was because we went to ride the B-68 in McDonald Avenue and the Church Avenue trolleys. And so that was the real attraction for the day and the real thrill.
Well, street cars, right, Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the last three
And
lines.
there were only 3 left by that time, Coney Island
Yeah.
Avenue,
The
McDonald.
1956.
Church Avenue, Coney Island Avenue, McDonald Avenue.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question, sort of a comment to make, going back to Cincinnati for a minute. I was in Cincinnati a couple of years ago before the so-called Bell Connector started to run. And there was talk about, because they have the subway there, well, all of it wouldn't be useful. There was talk about possibly connecting the light rail to be into certain parts of the completed subway. Have you heard anything about that in your travels down there?
Yeah, I mean, the city probably every 20 years or so does a study, and and then there's a newspaper article, and then it just dies. And there's less and less of it available. A lot of it has been demolished. A big chunk of it was demolished for the construction of I-75. And then a lot of portions up in Norwood, the kind of top of the circle, have all been either filled in or demolished by the city of Norwood. So really the main sections that are left are the sections that are in the canal bed, the actual subway. Because really only probably about 15 or 20% of it was going to be subway. The rest was either a grade or elevated structure. That's all gone. That's all demolished.
The parallel between that and Rochester is and Newark.
And Newark,
all built in the subway, and only Newark survives. And it's really a tragedy about Rochester, what they threw away.
Yeah, if you're in Cincinnati and you're going north on I-75, when you go under Harrison Avenue, if you look off the right, you can see the entrance to the tunnel where it went into the canal. That's one of the few parts that you can actually see, because everything on Central Avenue has been basically covered. You can't even see the shafts anymore.
Well, seeing that as I left Cincinnati on the bus when I was there, the bus just went by where you could see one of the portals under a highway or something like that.
All right, so
All right.
I think our speakers are probably, they've really given a lot of their time. Do we have any final comments or questions or accolades before we close down for the summer here?
Well,
Thank
I
you,
just want
Robert.
to say
Super
thank
show.
you, Alan Englander here, saying thank you for once again an excellent program. Really one of the best.
Thank you very much.
No question
Appreciate
about it.
Paul and Kristen, it's good to see you guys. This is George.
Hey, George.
And I wanted to
Bob,
tell you,
you made a good point.
I thoroughly enjoyed this tag team program that you guys did. It was a very variegated subject. And I'm curious, since my scout troop out here in Pittsburgh sees a lot more snakes this year. When you guys were going into these desolated tunnel areas, what was your experience there? Were you concerned about that, or?
No, I made Kristen go first.
Oh, okay.
Bob, you made a very good point. Kristen was really the first woman presenter that we've had. That may be a good thing to look at in the future. I know I've dragged my wife around to enough properties that if I give a show, she can comment on at least some of it before I put it through. Jack May's wife has seen tram systems all over the world. There's got to be other women out there that could possibly be involved in the hobby that could be put on shows as well.
Mary.
Well, in case of Jack, Claire usually goes to museums while Jack's
That's
riding
true.
streetcars.
I think Kristen is particularly special because she's really made it her profession, working now at several PTM is now her third transport museum. If you've done Delta and Southeast of Georgia, and PTM is your third. We're waiting for you to come as executive director of the New York Transit Museum.
New York Transit Museum.
Don't laugh, you never know.
Never know.
She's an exceptional woman, and we applaud her performance this evening and her perceptions, which are different from ours, let's face it. And we need that kind of perspective to lure our wives along these journeys that we make. Thank you, Kristen.
Oh, thank you. You know, I will say, when I go, to trolley meets or transit meetups, people usually assume I'm there against my will. Although now people know me, not so much, but like, at the Hoosier Traction meet, I think one time I went with Paul, and I'm looking around the tables and someone is like, oh, it's so nice of you to accompany your partner, have a free book. And I'm like, okay, awesome.
Work for you, right?
Kristen, did you get the?
I don't know who gave you that book, but I can definitely tell you, I know a couple guys who wouldn't have parted with anything like that without full price.
There's another aspect of this meeting, because there were over 100 people here, and I saw people from TRB, from Tri-State. I saw George Hicalis,
right,
Mike Licken, and Paul Waldron, and a whole bunch of people whom I've been associated with over the years, but in different venues. This is a wonderful collection of professionals getting together on the things about the things they love, and also cat lovers.
Oh, sorry. Thought this was excellent, and it was interesting all the way through. It just kept going, and so from Phoenix, I appreciate it. Thanks.
It reminds me with what Dave said that I forgot to do, and Kristen, you are very fastidious at PTM presentations to do your 1 to 2 minute commercial on membership at PTM. I forgot to do that tonight, but usually people are in the know. We've actually gotten increases in membership from the Zoom presentations, but you do that masterfully with the PTM Zoom shows.
Yeah, the February meeting we had Eric and Mary Ostowitz, and she took a lot of the.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Except she did not have nearly the. She did take a lot of the video. She's probably the closest thing to what you do, Chris. The difference is. You had a major speaking role tonight, and I think he did almost all the narration, but it is true she does a fair amount of all the photography. So she's probably, you two should meet sometime. I don't think it's out of the realm of impossibilities. So that's right.
Right, Paul? I think we met them at the Reading and Northern.
Yeah, we got off an RDC, and the two of them were filming a steam excursion. We were like, oh, hi.
Right. Okay, any other comments, questions, accolades?
No, great show.
Great show.
Excellent show.
The
All right.
questions were easy. I expected tougher questions. This was easy.
Oh, you got a lot of questions, so you just handled them very well. All right. On that note, one more time, no July or August show. Our next program is September 16th. If you're interested, if you are not currently a member, these things are not. We do let people on free to the Zoom shows, but you can sign up online at erausa.org. One more time, it's erausa.org, or if you forget that, just Google Electric Railroaders Association. I think Sandy is offline now.
No, he's here.
He's here.
Sandy's
our great webmaster, and he's put the website together in such a way that announcing all our programs, all of the recordings. This was recorded and will be available within probably about a week. You just keep checking back at the website. Also, most, not all previous programs are
10
recorded.
minutes, maybe.
Just erausa.org. And if you're not a member, please feel free to join. Just like any organization, we do have expenses. We are in good financial shape, but we also rely on donations so that we remain in good financial shape.
We have one new member on here that just joined today. And this is a good welcome.
As in tonight or today?
Joined today.
Today, very good. All right, the more the merrier. Okay, one more.
Pipe organ too.
On that note, I wish everyone a happy summer. We will see you, but if we don't see you either on the Greece trip or our San Diego convention, we will be back June 16th. I will not be here, but Paul will be the moderator for that program. So wish you all a good summer. See you September 16th, not before. And again, many thanks, Paul and Kristen, and good night to everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
Good night, everyone.
Right.